dedicated to the late Kentaro Miura. Your work inspired so many of us. When I started releasing videos on YouTube in 2012, I quickly decided on the visual theme for my channel, bonfires. Obviously, this was a recognizable reference to Dark Souls, but I like to think that the connection goes deeper. I wanted my videos to be a welcome reprieve from your difficult time playing the game, an experience that refills your Estus and inspires you to dive back in, armed with new information. Dark Souls, by design, sends a vast number of its players online looking for answers. This can be a wonderful thing. As you read the messages left by others, you can sense an active community around you, not unlike seeing the in-game phantoms of other players. Sharing your hardships can halve your despair. Sharing your successes can double your joy. Debating the lore helps you learn. That social connection is so important. Thus, I came to realize that my channel should have a social aspect as well. We are, after all, watching the same videos, playing the same games, sitting at the same bonfires. Your summon sign is placed nearby, isn't it? Let's bridge the gap between worlds. In 2012, I announced the prosthetic art competition for Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. At the time, we knew precious little about the game, but hype was building around the prosthetic arm attachments that the character could equip to deal with certain situations. I adore this period of pre-release hype leading up to a new release, so I figured an art competition would be just the thing to pass the time and give visual form to the fancies of our imagination. 1 month and over 1,000 pieces of fan art later, we were sated. Cannon attachments, shuriken chainsaws, kunai harpoons, claw arms. Looking back, these prosthetic tools weren't even close to From Software's official designs. But it didn't matter. These designs had fanned the flames of hype and were so incredibly ambitious and magnificently executed that they inspired 4 more art competitions and eventually this book. I've always loved the process of commissioning and receiving artwork. You describe a vision, however abstract, to an artist, and together you bring a new piece of work into existence. The competitions have increased that joy tenfold. For their part, countless competitors have commented that the competitions inspired them to become better artists. Here was an opportunity to challenge others or to challenge themselves, expanding their portfolios with art that revolves around the games that we all love. My one regret was that, originally, I was only able to financially reward those who placed within the top 10. Now though, thanks to you, Soul Arts has afforded me the ability to pay a first-place reward for every artist's entry seen within these pages. Judging each of these entries for YouTube was extremely difficult. How on earth are you supposed to assign an objective value to something as subjective as art? With each competition, I added and averaged new metrics for my critique, but by the end, I had accepted that the best thing to do was to simply trust my instincts and let the art speak for itself. This is exactly why Soul Arts is so important. With this book, we were able to go outside of a contrived top 10 and reveal more artwork than I ever thought I'd be able to show off. The entries to follow aren't ranked in any way. They're simply a testament to the artists who created them and fascinating love letters to the creations of From Software. So please, take it all in. Read the lore that I've composed for each entry, appreciate the hours of work behind each piece, and seek out the artist portfolios at the end. I hope Soul Arts goes on to inspire you. New Sekiro prosthetics. There's something special about the lead-up to a new From Software game release. The promise of new hardships to overcome and a new world to explore is tantalizing, to say the least. From Software can be notoriously tight-lipped in their marketing for new releases. See Elden Ring. But to quote Emily Dickinson, we invariably sing the tune without the words and imagine the most perfect Soulsborne game ever made. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice complicated the popular Soulsborne classification of previous games. First of all, calling them Soul Sekiro-born games kinda sounds terrible. Besides, Sekiro differentiates itself from so much of what that classification had come to represent. A customizable character, different armor sets, varied builds. Sekiro moved away from all of it. It is, and remains, the biggest deviation from the Soulsborne formula to date. The main way you customize your character and playstyle is by adapting Sekiro's prosthetic arm, which can fit various prosthetic tools. Before the game's release, we only knew of a few, so imagining the types of weapons Sekiro might equip sent my mind reeling with possibilities. In that moment, I came up with the Prosthetic Art Challenge, a guide to help artists give form to the tools in our imagination. In addition to a cash reward and exposure, I also teased a potential mystery prize to motivate artists. I have never revealed what this prize was until now. 1 month before Sekiro's release, I was invited to From Software's offices to see and play the game early. I came bearing a laminated art book, filled with all of this incredible unofficial art, hoping to relay employee reactions back to the artists. Sadly, I was never allowed the opportunity to show anyone at their office. Regardless, these works remain a testament to the imagination that From Software inspires, and I hope that some among their numbers appreciate the talented artists in the pages to follow. Sticky Bomb by Reiner. Few entries incorporated Sekiro's hand as an integral component of the tool, but that's what makes this piece truly special. As seen in the animation sequence above, Sekiro bites the enemy, attaching his arm to theirs. Then, with a flick of his wrist and slash of his blade, he sparks the fuse, severs his prosthetic arm and dashes away, leaving an enemy to deal with the impending sticky bomb explosion. What's amazing about this is the gameplay loop it introduces. You can deliver a powerful blow, but you're incapacitating yourself in the process, and you must be prepared to recover your prosthetic hand afterwards. If you've just left combat, you can simply go and retrieve it, but if you're still engaged with multiple enemies, you might prefer to retrieve your hand with the grappling hook. Lucas proposes 3 bomb variants. The first is a canister filled with torch oil, which splatters thanks to a thin spine of gunpowder ignited through the center. It inflicts the burn status to those within a small radius, dealing damage over time and preventing posture recovery. The second is a flask of Zakarashi toxin, which leaks its contents onto the bitten enemy, inflicting poison status. This drains HP over time and deals grievous posture damage to certain foes. The last is an urn filled with the shards of metal, serving as a more standard bomb, dealing a sudden chunk of physical damage across a large radius. R2. Prosthetic Attack. Grab, detach, and ignite. If your grab misses, the emblem cost is refunded. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. Slash with your katana while performing a backstep, useful for getting out of the explosion radius. Bone Scythe by Mironov. This deadly prosthetic extends Sekiro's reach, releasing tension to fold a scythe out along a secondary prosthetic bone. When extended to its full length, the scythe spins on its own axis, dealing heavy slash damage to one's opponent. R2. Prosthetic Attack. Release the scythe and allow it to spin, inflicting damage and deflecting attacks. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. Perform a dual strike attack with your katana and scythe, leaping backwards to evade enemy attacks. This attack returns the bone scythe to its contracted state. Pivoting Greatsword by Vernon. Sekiro is exceptional for its strict adherence to katana swordplay, as opposed to contemporary titles which offer a diverse selection of weapons and movesets. This approach enabled From Software to design encounters perfectly suited to the timings of a single weapon, though it comes at the cost of player choice and expression. That's where Vernon's Pivoting Greatsword comes in. Similar to many of the trick weapons in Bloodborne, Sekiro is able to sheath his katana into the greater blade and wield them together, unlocking a slower, weightier moveset. While this might not be as effective against some enemies, your katana is always just one button press away, maintaining the integrity of Sekiro's tight swordplay. When not in use, the Pivoting Greatsword lives up to its name, snapping back into a sheathed mode. R2. Prosthetic Attack. Wielding dual blades, you are able to deflect and attack simultaneously. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Sheath your katana into the Pivoting Greatsword and perform a weighted overhead slam. Rotten Dragon by Greta Frizzi. Legends tell of an accursed dragon who once terrorized the inhabitants of Himeshima Island. It would eat anything: livestock, crops, children. Soon the islanders were left with nothing, so they stole away in the night, sailing ships to faraway lands, hoping to find a new home. Left without a source of food and unable to make the long flight to neighboring islands, the dragon died, a victim of its own desire. Hundreds of years later, a lone voyager finds the rotting vertebrae and transports them across the sea, where they fall into your hands. Fool that you are, you forge these obsidian bones into a prosthetic weapon, one that has a lingering tendency to go for the throat. Listen carefully, and you may hear the dragon's voice, whispering of ancient desires. R2. Prosthetic attack. The dragon flies for the enemy's throat, crushing it. If an enemy is on low health, this attack will behead the opponent, releasing a toxic cloud. R2. Hold. Perform a grab attack, dealing damage and inflicting poison as the bones pull the enemy towards you. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. SEKIRO dashes towards the enemy, piercing them with a katana thrust attack. Hand of the Rising Sun by Ricardo Emig. When all appears lost, the shinobi has one last trick up his sleeve. With a flick of the wrist, a giant sky lantern erupts into the air, blinding all who stand below. The tide has turned, and the shinobi seizes the day. Now, victory is as sure as the rising sun. This prosthetic weapon is extraordinary, but it's not uncommon to see a similar flair for the absurd in From Software's own designs. Take Dark Souls, for instance. Katarina Knights look like onions, channelers frequently burst into dance, and who didn't marvel at the ridiculous visage of King Seeker Frampt? Truth is, these designs bristle with character, and a little levity goes a long way in these dark, desperate worlds. R2. Prosthetic attack. Hot air from the flamethrower inflates the bag, thrusting you into the air. Once afloat, reflective capsules within the lantern refract sun rays, blinding enemies below. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. If R1 is pressed in the instant an enemy is blinded by a ray of light, then you leap down and perform a death blow. R2, while balloon is afloat, grapple back up to the balloon and prepare for another follow-up attack. Mantis Blade by Austin Strout. This weapon is inspired by the mantis, an insect with raptorial forelegs that snap out to grasp at prey. Likewise, the mantis blade stores tension in a compacted form before bursting forward with incredible reach. Few prosthetic weapons are designed to deal with groups of enemies, but the mantis blade excels in this scenario, using enemies as projectiles and causing chaos within their ranks. R2. Prosthetic attack. Perform a horizontal sweeping strike that slices through enemies. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. The mantis blade briefly retracts, then strikes, snaring a target. Use the control stick to throw enemies in the desired direction. Foes can be flung off cliffs or at each other. Boleadora Blade by Jari Melgén. Not all weapons need to kill. The time may come where you need to capture a fleeing victim alive. Fetch me 3 hunks of scrap iron and a rope of some sort. Then I'll get to work. A bowler is a primitive hunting tool used by many cultures foreign to Japan. While designs vary widely, the Boleadora generally consists of a length of cord with 3 weights attached. These weights are spun above the head and hurled at the target, entangling their legs and bringing them down. They have been used to hunt cattle, birds, and even humans. A famous craftsman once crossed the ocean, seeking knowledge from foreign lands. He met folk who could take down game with startling accuracy. Before long, those same weapons were being used to tie men on horseback. Now, even their horses are trained to escape it. Adapt or die. Such is the way of war. R2. Prosthetic attack. Perform an underhanded slash while flinging the Boleadora stones ahead of you, ensnaring the first target they hit. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. Lunge a small distance forward while performing a stab attack. Grip stretches to extend your reach. No one here has ever seen a weapon like this before. They won't know what's coming until it's far too late. The element of surprise. Use it while you still can. Collapsible Bow and War Fan by Bruno Marquez. The cunningly crafted metal of the war fan allows it to unsheath and fly through the air with stunning aerodynamics. R2 Prosthetic attack. Hurl the open fan at the target. It acts like a boomerang, returning to the player and slicing through any enemies on its path. R2 plus R1. Follow-up attack. If timed correctly with the return of the fan, the player can catch the fan and initiate a spinning attack in one smooth motion. Designed alongside the Warfan is the Collapsible bow, a bamboo bow and wooden arrow that compresses into a retracted form alongside the quiver. Unlike any other prosthetic tool, the Collapsible bow can also be utilized in first person, allowing one to snipe enemies from afar. Sekiro's prosthetic tools are typically designed for utility rather than raw combat potential. For example, the loaded axe allows you to break an opponent's guard. The loaded shuriken allows you to knock enemies out of the air. These weapons are very strong in specific scenarios and weak in others. Thus, I was surprised when Sekiro was released without a weapon like the Collapsible bow. After all, bows in Souls games are mainly used for their utility, allowing you to aggro specific enemies and pull them towards you from a distance. So why didn't they like this option in Sekiro? My guess is that it proved too powerful. Luring enemies one at a time makes certain encounters very easy, and at the end of the day, Sekiro expects more from its player in terms of combat mastery. Get good or die twice. R2, prosthetic attack. Quickly shoot an arrow, dealing minimal damage and staggering the enemy. R2, hold. Charge and aim your arrow shot in first person, sniping enemies for minimal damage. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Lunge forward with a thrusting attack. Deals heavy damage. Great Wolf Cannon by Jonathan Comoglio. The Great Wolf Cannon is inspired by the legend of the Okuri Okami, a sending-off wolf that follows lonely travelers walking through wild mountain passes. This creature is a yokai, a supernatural spirit with behavior that can range from malevolent to fortuitous. In the case of the Okuri Okami, it can be at once both a grave threat and a great protector. According to this ancient Japanese folklore, if you are walking a mountain path at night and see a wolf trailing you, beware. It may well be the Okuri Okami, waiting for you to stumble and fall. Step carefully on the rocky ground, for if you trip, the creature will pounce, tearing you to shreds. Alternatively, if you project confidence and keep your footing, then the being will protect you from all other predators of the mountains. It's a sobering thought, but perhaps the Okuri Okami is so dangerous that even other yokai dare not interfere with the game it plays with its prey. The prosthetic weapon it inspired is a powerful cannon built to punish grouped-up enemies. When fired, the smoke from the shot builds up in a canister behind the cannon. This smoke can then be released to blind enemies and regain stealth. In this way, the Great Wolf Cannon can destroy and protect, just like the Okuri Okami of legend. R2, prosthetic attack. Slice your sword against the flint striker, igniting the fuse and firing the cannon. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Slice your sword between the wolf's mouth, releasing a buildup of toxic smoke. You can then regain stealth and temporarily incapacitate nearby enemies. Hooked Blade by Cursed Pixel. The Japanese god of industry stands before you. O Inari offers the hooked blade, a mechanical marvel for this day and age. May it serve you well in the battles to come. R2, prosthetic attack. The blade is hurled underhand, extending towards the target. R2, hold. Reel the hooked enemy towards you. Can be used in stealth to pull enemies from ledges or separate patrols. Deals continuous posture damage. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Sekiro pulls the hook from the target and performs a thrust attack. If enemy posture was broken, an execution is performed. Karasu Claw by D.B. Root. According to D.B. Root, this weapon was devised by the Karasu Tengu, supernatural beings with avian features and humanoid physique. Karasu means crow in Japanese, and the claw and quills of such a creature have clearly inspired the design. Those who have played Sekiro will recall encounters with a Tengu. Isshin Ashina is frequently disguised as one to mask his identity. Commonly depicted with a red face and long nose, they are said to abduct humans, cause wars, teach magic, and control the wind. Karasu Tengu are actually considered a lesser variant, but their legend is still worthy of fear and respect. This foreboding claw embodies Tengu ingenuity, a spring-loaded cannon that sticks an explosive to grappled opponents, turning them into a living fireball that engulfs adjacent comrades. R2, prosthetic attack. Perform a parry animation. If timed to counter an enemy strike, the claw grapples the attacker. A grappled enemy can be hurled aside in the direction of the control stick. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack, attaches a sticky bomb to the grappled enemy and blasts them away. Bomb detonates upon landing, dealing explosive damage to adjacent enemies. Passive ability, slows your descent while against a vertical surface, activates automatically after jumping at a wall or descending from a ledge. Iwabo by Sean Florence. The Japanese word iwabo translates to rock stick, an apt description for such a conspicuous weapon. Dressed in Ofuda talismans and possessing some mechanical grace, there is more to this prosthetic than first appears, but make no mistake, even for a shinobi, sometimes a blunt approach is simply the best. The iwabo was once wielded by a dangerous oni, a demon who terrorized lesser beings of the heavenly realm. So harrowing were his misdeeds that he earns the ire of Bishamonten, a god of war and punisher of evildoers. Bishamonten erased the oni, down to his very name, but kept the iwabo in his treasure house, hoping it would one day be wielded by righteous hands. The Ofuda talismans embellishing the weapon carry Bishamonten's name, warding against corruption and granting the wielder great strength. As such, the weapon feels lighter, unless you're on the receiving end of its hulking mass. Choose your enemies wisely, lest you feel Bishamonten's wrath. R2, prosthetic attack. Hoist and swing the great club to the right, then the left. Enemies are knocked backwards when hit. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Perform a spinning attack. After the second spin, centripetal force is released and you are carried into the air, bowling over any enemy in your path. The attack ends with a katana thrust as the great club strikes the ground. Kamaitachi by Leonardo Bruno. Many Japanese legends speak of the Kamaitachi, a devilish creature that hides within whirlwinds. As one story goes, children from Edo were enveloped by a whirlwind, and afterwards beastly footprints were found upon their backs. Another story from Western Japan tells of a wind that slices off skin so swiftly that no pain is felt. Yet another tale from Hida says these winds hide 3 evil gods. The first knocks you down, the second cuts with a blade, and the third applies medicine, masking any pain. Like its namesake, this prosthetic weapon may easily be mistaken for the wind, with a loud mechanical howl that precipitates its razor edge. While stationary, one can even spy its bestial form designed within the disc. In this motionless state, the saw rests near the elbow, at the top of the rail. A lock holds the spring-loaded saw in place, storing tension that will propel it down the arm rail to whirl in a dock at the back of the hand. R2, prosthetic attack. The saw spins down the rail towards the hand, gaining forward momentum that is used in a devastating left hook. R2, hold. Extend the duration of the attack, grinding away enemy health and or posture, very effective against heavier enemies who won't be knocked away. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. A downward chop is performed with the katana, followed by a kneeling slice with the Kamaitachi that grinds your opponent to the ground. R2 plus R1, hold. Extend the duration of the attack, grinding away enemy health and or posture, very effective against lighter enemies who are pressed to the ground. Karasawa by ArtNotHearts. Concealed within Senpo Temple lies the red mortal blade, Fushikiri. Without the power of resurrection, one cannot hope to draw it, let alone use it as a part of another weapon. Introducing the Karasawa, a Gatling gun designed to sheathe the mortal blade. The Karasawa is a reference to a line of heavy laser rifles that feature in the Armored Core series, one of From Software's earlier game franchises. While slow-firing and heavy, this weapon is typically one of the most powerful weapons you can find in-game. From Software is notorious for placing references such as the Moonlight Greatsword across all of their games, and it's fun to see the Karasawa fulfilling that same sort of role here. The collapsed form of the Karasawa allows for ease of movement while equipped. When firing, it takes a moment to expand and spin up, giving a notable drawback to an otherwise powerful weapon. Its true form appears when the mortal blade is sheathed within, shrouding the gun in a familiar red darkness. With energy pulses that sever immortality from a distance, the Karasawa retains the impressive late-game power it is renowned for. R2, prosthetic attack. Hold to fire a stream of bullets from the Gatling gun. Takes a moment to charge. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Sheath the mortal blade into Karasawa, revealing the true form of the weapon. R2 now charges and unleashes a huge blast of energy that decimates anything in its path. Kunai Harpoon by Jonathan Lee. Of all the prosthetic tools available to Sekiro, none are specifically designed to assist him in stealth. Sure, he can throw a loaded shuriken from a bush or leap down upon foes with the loaded axe, but both of these options merely utilize the element of surprise. They do not embody it. In contrast, the Kunai Harpoon allows one to strike and still maintain cover, provided they kill ingeniously. With a rotating reel shaft and pneumatic firing mechanism, a large kunai can be fired at a target, then reeled back in. When used from stealth, the weapon abruptly pulls enemies to your location, where they can be quietly dispatched. This makes the harpoon highly effective at separating enemy patrols. Some are silenced with a shot to the throat or lungs, others are too startled to even cry out. R2, prosthetic attack. Fire the kunai at a target. R2, hold. If hooked by the kunai, the target is reeled in, taking posture damage over time. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Sweep towards a hooked enemy with a horizontal katana attack. Enemies with broken posture can be executed. Locust Hive by Paul Herr. Deep within Yusui Forest, you discover a terrible scene. An entire village ravaged. Townsfolk lie dead in the streets, their skin red and swollen. Incense masks the stench of death, its trail leading to a gaunt man sitting calmly on a porch. Around him hang enormous hives, surfaces crawling with insects. You're that shinobi. Oh yes, I've heard about you. A ruthless killer, or so they say. Don't worry, the locusts will not harm you. My name is Aochi Sadatsuna. I command the swarm, for now. As you converse, you learn that this incense exudes a special smoke that keeps the locusts docile. These dead folk were once my countrymen, but they brought this fate upon themselves. When I learned that they planned to unleash these toxic insects upon the Ashina, I could not stand idly by. I stole their incense in the night, and the devilish creatures did the rest. A samurai should kill with honor and dignity, but I have done neither this day. Kill me. Take one hive, but burn the rest. This is a shinobi's weapon, after all. R2, prosthetic attack. Release a stream of toxic locusts that sting enemies in the adjacent area. Slowly applies the poison status effect. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Lunge towards your target, stabbing them with the lower jaw of the Oni mask. Locusts sting opponents from the inside, instantly applying the poison status effect. Shokuji-Arm by Afik Daniel Sham. Sekiro may hunt prey as a wolf, but that doesn't mean he has to eat like one. The land of Ashina holds a bounty of delicious ingredients. Why not take a moment to enjoy them? After much cajoling, the sculptor crafted the Shokuji arm. It allows for deft chopstick control, and even comes with a tea brewing kit to help Sekiro wind down after the heat of battle. R2, prosthetic attack. Sekiro consumes an equipped restorative item, granting additional health regeneration. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Forcibly ejects the chopsticks towards an enemy, deals moderate damage, but forces Sekiro to eat with his hands once more. How barbaric. Lupine Gauntlet by Cameron Nissen. A prosthetic weapon boasting extreme utility, the Lupine Gauntlet can rend flesh and even provide a temporary hold on terrain when equipped. R2, prosthetic attack. Leap forward a short distance and initiate a grab attack, dealing significant posture damage. Player then leaps back to starting location. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. If enemy posture is broken by the grab, you can follow up with a decapitating death blow from your katana. Moonlight Sword by Joseph Bramlett. Ever since the original Kingsfield, released in 1994, every action game by From Software has featured the iridescent Moonlight Greatsword in some shape or form. Or at least they had, until the release of Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. According to From Software, Sekiro had a very defined setting that didn't allow for a lot of influences like the Moonlight Greatsword. In an interview with Newsweek, marketing manager Yasuhiro Katao said, "It's not that we didn't think about it, it's just that it's kind of hard to implement it in the game in a way that would make sense and would look good." If this famous weapon was to appear anywhere in Sekiro, it would surely have been a prosthetic tool, as these are the closest Sekiro gets to equipping weapons other than his katana. With 3 blades, a matchlock firing mechanism, and a rope soaked in flammable alcohol, Joseph's Moonlight Sword is true to its form and heritage, offering the utility of a prosthetic tool while acknowledging its traditional function as a greatsword with a ranged attack. R2, prosthetic attack. Perform a series of slow but powerful horizontal swings. R2, hold. Temporarily slow down time and enter a third-person aiming mode. Here, the player can aim at enemies within a narrow field of view, and press R3 to lock onto 2 to 3 targets. Once R2 is released, a blade shoots at each target, impaling them upon adjacent structures. The long hemp rope between each blade then ignites in blue flame, burning the foes bound along its length. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Dash towards impaled enemies, slashing them with your katana and recalling your Moonlight blades. Naga Cannon by Raquel del Campo. Deep within the valleys of Ashina resides the clan of the Sunken Valley. According to item descriptions, among their number are descendants of the ancient Okami clan, those otherworldly carp-like beings we found occupying the Divine Realm. Somehow these descendants now sit forlorn in the Sunken Valley, mining its precious minerals and enduring poisonous lakes. But what if they were still seeking another heavenly realm, as their ancestors once did? What if this time it was located below instead of above? Many Indian religions speak of Patala, a heavenly underworld that exists below our earthly dimension. Here, a race of snake people called Naga dwell amidst beautiful groves, jewels, and palaces. Just as we hop in a palanquin to ascend to the Fountainhead Palace, I like to imagine that the Sunken Valley clan members are attempting something similar, offering themselves to palanquins of the Great Serpents, in the hopes that they might descend upon Patala and find the Naga of legend. Raquel has designed a weapon that perfectly suits this fan theory of mine, the Naga Cannon, a weapon filled with deadly toxins, something I could imagine SEKIRO equipping if he finds his way to Patala. R2, prosthetic attack. The smaller of the two cannons releases a storm of darts, each laced with a venom that paralyzes any target hit. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. The larger cannon fires a wicked projectile designed to impale an opponent. While impaled, they are injected with a poisonous dose of venom that deals damage over time. Depending on enemy weight, a powerful winch pulls victims towards you or propels you towards them. Ogre's Wrath by Timothy Kelly. On your adventure through SEKIRO Shadows Die Twice, you would undoubtedly have encountered difficult enemies with red, glowing eyes. These red eyes are a side effect of drinking the rejuvenating waters, a substance that grants astonishing resilience at the cost of one's sanity. Beset by the forces of the Interior Ministry, many within Ashina will do whatever it takes to defend their land, even shed humanity itself. Deep within the abandoned dungeon, Dujin toils at terrible experiments with the rejuvenating waters. For his work, he requires a subject tough enough to withstand his procedures, and indeed, these are the sorts of subjects we later find crazed and chained throughout the game. According to the second prayer bead item, in Ashina there is a towering pink ogre of a man, said to have gone red-eyed and run amok before he was long shut away in a forsaken dungeon. With difficulty, we are able to kill this chained ogre, but what if it were possible to make use of his undying flesh? Perhaps a prosthetic tool could be crafted. Ogre's Wrath is one such weapon, a spring-loaded scythe made from bones and sinew. The ogre's bloodlust remains, and his muscles twitch in anticipation of striking out at a foe. R2, prosthetic attack. The scythe lunges forward and expands for a long-range attack, dealing significant damage. If the enemy has low health or posture, then this attack acts as a ranged death blow. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. The momentum of this retracting scythe propels a spinning slash. Shuriken Hayabusa by Salvador Pomar. Hayabusa is the Japanese word for the peregrine falcon, the fastest bird in the world. With a lightning-fast dive, the Shuriken Hayabusa 2 strikes foes at almost imperceptible speeds, a veritable falcon swooping down upon prey. Very few have the reflexes to block this weapon, making it a choice prosthetic for whittling down enemy HP. Falconry is the act of hunting with a trained bird of prey, and the first records of it in Japan appeared around the 4th century. It has traditionally been a sport of the noble class, requiring deep pockets and free time, things typically denied to common folk. Just so, the Shuriken Hayabusa is a noble weapon, White polished metal folds neatly out of its elegantly engraved sheath, revealing a feathered saw and a pointed star. It's clearly the work of a master craftsman, but few who see it flying their way will have time to appreciate its magnificence. R2, prosthetic attack. Perform a horizontal slash attack, cleaving nearby foes. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. After you have built momentum, the Shuriken Hayabusa is brought down overhead with lightning speed, striking the selected enemy. This attack is essentially unblockable, unless you are facing a sword saint. Kashikoi's Tooth by Jonathan Gregory Bick. A chain sickle fashioned from the fang of a great serpent. The upper part of the tooth is still clinging to a small segment of the serpent's jaw, allowing it to contract and secrete poison. Such a weapon is thus a living extension of your reach and the serpent's. R2, prosthetic attack. Hurl Kashikoi's Tooth towards the target, deals moderate damage and applies a small dose of poison. R2, hold. Pull struck enemies back towards you, building up their poison meter over time. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Perform a spinning slash, simultaneously coating your katana in poison. Tetsuyu Fist by Jordan Eastwood. Ashina's desperate experiments with the rejuvenating waters spawned many red-eye demons, ogres, whose enormous frames had to be restrained for the safety of all. In rare cases, they were unleashed upon Ashina's enemies like a raging bull. The ogres that survived escaped into the mountains, leaving terrible destruction in their wake. Nestled in these same mountains was a village belonging to the Tetsuyu clan, who had lived there for generations. An industrious people rich in iron ore, they were making good export during this time of war. At least, they were, until the ogres came and made the mountains their home. To prevent their own from being eaten, the Tetsuyu clan paid tribute to the monsters, offering enormous quantities of food to placate their growing menace. Before long, they were left with nothing. Nothing except iron. In these dark days, news reached them of a shinobi hiding amongst the Ashina. He was a terror, they said, a killer with a fang for an arm that could shift to overcome any weakness. Inspired by this tale and on the brink of starvation, the brave folk of the Tetsuyu clan devised a plan to fight back. The Tetsuyu Fist is a heavy iron dragon, a battering ram repurposed into a rocket-powered fist. Gunpowder ignites to drive the fist into enemy frames, offsetting any size disadvantage. With one final meal, the men prepared for battle. This time, they would pay their tribute in iron. R2, prosthetic attack. Rocket ahead with the Iron Dragon, battering your target for enormous posture damage. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Use the rocket's momentum to spin and slice with the katana, inflicting damage through their broken guard. Weeping Gold by Isabella Ziskowska. When something is broken, it should not be discarded. Instead, its flaws should be embraced and celebrated. That is the philosophy behind kintsugi, a process of golden repair that originated in Japan. By repairing the object, usually pottery, with lacquer mixed with powdered gold, this new creation has its function restored and is often perceived to be even more beautiful than before. Weeping Gold is the prosthetic tool featuring a charmed golden shredder. The mechanism within is an alchemical marvel, ceaselessly discharging liquid gold when activated. If this shredder is brought before the sculptor, he will craft a tool capable of simultaneously breaking and repairing your blade, strengthening it for a short time. The standard prosthetic attack for this tool utilizes the technique of half-swording, a method of gripping the blade by hand in order to better direct forceful thrusts into an opponent's armor. For most soldiers, it's dangerous to grasp one's weapon by the blade. For someone with a prosthetic arm, however, such a technique offers little risk. R2, prosthetic attack. Half-sword your katana blade and thrust at weak spots in an opponent's armor. Deals significant damage against heavily armored foes. R2 plus R1, follow-up attack. Ram your katana through the prosthetic shredder, breaking it and applying Weeping Gold simultaneously. Increases damage dealt for 30 seconds. This process can also be performed as a deathblow animation. Elden Ring Boss Challenge. On the 9th of July 2019, From Software announced Elden Ring with a stunning cinematic trailer. The hype was real for fans of the studio. who had, at this point, come to expect a regular stream of games from the Japanese developer. A cinematic trailer was an auspicious sign indeed. Surely the game was nearing completion. We couldn't wait. But the wait was inevitable, as Elden Ring would go on to receive little in the way of marketing or news over the next couple of years. If you weren't a fan during this time, I both envy and pity you. It was an excruciating interim, and yet the memes were absolutely hilarious. Suffering from a severe lack of information, the community began to hollow. Communities such as the Elden Ring subreddit have documented this slow descent into madness. Users would commonly pretend the game was already out, offering guides for boss encounters that didn't exist. Writers created fake lore about the bosses they'd never fight. Some burgeoning developers even went as far as to create their own fan-made version of the game. These were dark times, discussed amidst whispers that Elden Ring had been nothing more than a vivid fever dream shared between us all. To help fight or fuel the madness of the Elden Ring community during this time, I proposed an art competition with the goal of imagining Elden Ring. Despite the lack of marketing, we did know some facts about the game. First, that it was open world. Second, that it was more similar to Dark Souls than anything else. And third, that the game appeared to be inspired by Germanic mythology. From these mere scraps, artists were instructed to imagine an Elden Ring boss encounter. I was, and remain, so incredibly proud of the work that they have produced. You, dear reader, have likely already played Elden Ring by the time you read this. What's it like? I hope it's everything we dreamed it would be. Yggdrasil by Holdsworth Hands. Countless years ago, Yggdrasil fought desperately, angered by the burning of the sacred tree. Now, body aching and broken, he shudders to his feet once more, defending the forest with weapons of old. In his right hand, the Elden Mace, which forged the Elden Ring. In his left, Svalin, the shield for the shining god of the mountains. At his hip hangs the Gjallarhorn, whose blast can be heard across all the worlds. Defeat this ancient being, and put his artifacts to better use. Yggdrasil serves as a sort of tutorial boss for the player, fighting similarly to Iudex Gundyr from Dark Souls 3. Yggdrasil's first phase introduces the player to the basics of combat. Many attacks are blockable, and can be easily dodged. In his second phase, however, roots erupt from his armor, and cinders turn to flame, sending Yggdrasil into a frenzy. Emerge victorious, and you gain access to the Northern Forest, a region now bereft of its sacred guardian. Go on and fight for what was lost. Reforge the rings of the Old Kingdom, and restore the Elden Ring that once shone in the sky. Mnemon of the Slain Sisters by Solomon Mansfield. The player character enters the fog, and a cutscene plays. You stand at the center of a dilapidated fortress, a city of crumbling columns and archways that hasn't been visited in centuries. The camera pans up. There is no ceiling here, and the moon is large, bright, and imposing. A murder of crows cry out violently as they pass, when suddenly something before you answers their call. The camera zooms in to reveal metal wings unfurling amongst the debris. They make a creaking, yawning sound, as if they haven't been moved in years. The sound is excruciating. Suddenly, a mangled arm peeks through to grab a rusting sword off the ground. The sword's shape is familiar, but it only holds traces of its former glory, like the waning crescent of the moon. The creature stands, unsteady, yet with latent power awakening in every moment. The boss health bar appears and reveals the name, Mnemon of the Slain Sisters. The name may fill the player with apprehension. 2 of Mnemon's sisters can be fought before her. They were remarkable foes, and few walk away unshaken. Fionn Nuala, the Tethered, by Tegan Goki. Long ago, there were 4 magical children of the Tuath, a mystical folk who inhabited the world before the arrival of man. Of the 4 children, one was by far the wisest and the most beautiful, Fionn Nuala. So jealous were her siblings that they set a curse upon her. By the power of the Elden Ring, she would remain a swan forevermore. An unintended side effect of this curse was that it granted Fionn Nuala a sort of immortality, so while her siblings passed on to the next world, she remained, alone. She spent her days singing by the entrance of Tur Ten Jaya by the Midnight Sea, hoping that Tuath would recognize her and allow her to return to their halls. Alas, unbeknownst to her, the Tuath had moved on long ago. Eons later, someone or something caused the Elden Ring to shatter, and Fionn Nuala's curse was crudely shattered with it. Now she roams as a distorted being, half freed from the curse, but half bound by it as well. Visit Turn Tanjaya by the midnight sea, and free this wretched soul from an unjust suffering. Condemned Hunter Rigel by Jari Melgén. Rigel had made a name for himself throughout the village. He was a talented hunter, the very best. No man hunted fiercer predators, nor returned with larger game. Even his lord had taken notice, and before long he had everything a man could ask for: a deed to land, a comfortable home, and the heart of a beautiful woman. There was, however, one thing he did not count on earning, and that was the jealousy of his peers. "I've heard he steals the kills from other hunters. His wife is a witch. I've seen her practicing black magic in the forest. He laughs at the Lord behind his back and plots to overthrow him one day." When the Lord received word of such treachery, he condemned the hunter and his wife to the gallows. With Rigel's dying breath, he cursed the jealousy of man. Time passed, and Rigel's village was long forgotten. Now the Elden Ring has fallen. The golden law that forbids life after death has been shattered. Condemned Hunter Rigel breathes once again. Venture into his domain, and you will find a subtle scarcity of wildlife. Rigel has been hunting here for years, and the bodies of deers and men are piled high in a clearing. Wait patiently. Before long, Rigel will trudge out of the woods carrying his newest kill. He attacks on sight, sending hounds and arrows your way. Take care lest you be added to the pile, another offering to Rigel's beloved wife. Danu the Puppet Knight by Celeste C. Dubbed the Godsmith, there was nothing that Galan could not repair, all bent to his will, for he knew the secret speech of fire and spoke its tongue to any element that spurned his temper. In the age of the War Queen, Galan was beloved by all. Now he has disappeared from the world. During times of war, Galan worked day and night, dedicated to the repair of weapons and armor shattered in combat. The War Queen had created a steady flow of conflict which pleased Galan, as many turned to his worship in such times. No blacksmith worth their salt could be found without a statue of him in their smithy. One day the queen came to him, holding for her something bright and broken. It was a ring, but not a ring, shattered as it was into a million tiny words. It spoke to Galan, begging for repair, so he took it and promised to reforge the tiny thing. Withdrawing deep below the earth, Galan toiled, endlessly. Days turned to months, months turned to years, and ages came and went in the face of the monumental task the queen had assigned him. Only recently has something emerged, but it is not Galan. Danu the Puppet Knight now stands guard in the cavern, delivering death to any who might disturb her master. Work on the Elden Ring has taught the Godsmith many terrible things. Soon his knights will break the world asunder, so that it might be reforged. Forest Guardian by Nolan192. The player ventures deep into the forest of lost souls, unsettled by the sultry whispers of ghostly Huldra moaning nearby. Pale hands and jagged tree branches reach out, but are swatted away. A clearing comes into view. The whispers cease. A hunched figure emerges from a nearby pool and lurches forward, struggling with some force beneath the water. Upon seeing the player, he charges ahead, only to be abruptly whipped backwards. A long weave of hair, tree branches, and Huldra tether him to the pool. The player turns to leave, but hands and tree branches now block the path behind. There's no choice but to fight. The Forest Guardian is under the Huldra's spell, that is, until their link to him is severed at the end of Phase 1. Slowly he stands, hair and dead Huldra sloughing away to reveal intricate armor gleaming in the moonlight. "Sir, you have done me a great service. Please, grant this pitiful knight one last request. Draw your sword, take your stance. Let us resume this properly." Nathalan's Bane by Zachary Sartre Duchesne. Winter is setting in. Leaves fall from the trees as you guide your steed through a harsh, bubbling swamp. The foggy air is fetid and polluted. It's a wonder that anything can grow here. Frost gathers at the edges of the mire, promising to cover its rancid morass in the weeks to come. The marsh eventually gives way to solid ground, rocky terrain edging the swamp back into small, frozen pools. Suddenly the ground begins to shake. Pebbles rattle at your feet as a red light approaches through the fog. Charging towards you is Nathalan's Bane. The swamp at your back prevents retreat, and the fog ahead obscures your vision. A nightmarish wail fills the air, and the fight begins. brace yourself. Nathalan's Bane uses the mist to great advantage, emerging for a quick strike only to vanish and reappear from a different direction. Identify an opening and strike swiftly, lest Nathalan's Bane become your own. Herne the Hunter by Caio Santos. Take care when you tread the ancient forest where Herne the Hunter stalks unseen, for his arrows are many and his eyes are keen. Once Herne presided as lord of the hunt, and frequently led a band of men into the forest, where they killed deer for sport. One fateful night, something in the forest enchanted the men, and they did not return. The nearby town, concerned for their lord and family, dispatched search parties to find them. Alas, these unfortunate volunteers were hunted by the very men they were sent after. The bewitched hunters followed them back to their town, and found sport there, just as they once had in the forest. Now the town is no more, and the forest lies still. No deer, nor men, are left to hunt. Much time has passed, and only one hunter remains, Herne, who fights with the might of many men. Like the great serpent from Sekiro, this is not a boss you are supposed to defeat. Instead, you'll be lucky to make it through the forest alive. As you progress, giant arrows whistle through the trees, and in the distance Herne may be glimpsed, pulling his unwieldy limbs through the woods. He protects a sacred oak tree, and will stalk ever closer as you approach. Perhaps this oak conceals the secret behind his enchantment and the true lord of the forest. Perennial Ormir by Marina Verlokseva. The perennial Ormir leads the encounter in human form, seated on a rock at the center of a frozen lake. He plucks at his instrument, unfazed by your intrusion. What brings you here, traveler? Desire? Revenge? Greed? I have a song for them all. This being has practiced his instrument for a millennia. If respectfully approached, it is said that he can teach a musician to play so adeptly that trees dance and waterfalls freeze in place. If approached as though he's a boss, well, then he may just become one. Ah, I know just the song for you. Dance for me. The boss music plays, performed by the boss's own hand. The scene comes to life. Branches and vines from surrounding trees begin to whip at you. Crystal spikes dart across the arena, preventing movement. The ice cracks and breaks underfoot. The arena is continually getting smaller, but you eventually make it to the center and strike the musician. A shrill, stray note plays as he takes damage. The music ends, and his bloody form lies panting upon the ice. Such a wonderful dancer, but a churlish listener. The ice cracks under his body, devouring it. After a few seconds, the Ormir emerges. It slithers out of the ice to attack with jaw, arm, and tail, only to collapse underneath and hide again. Once it's defeated, the lake dries out, revealing centuries of victims lured to its depths. Finally, silence has fallen. All are at rest. Erda's Ring by Ricardo Emig. This piece takes inspiration from Richard Wagner's The Ring, a 16-hour opera cycle that tells an epic story inspired by Germanic and Norse myths. In Wagner's mythology, Erda is the world's wisest woman. She knows all the stories that have ever been told, and all that are yet to be. At the core of Ricardo's entry is a round stone, flanked by item descriptions to the left and sheet music to the right. Like a vinyl record, this stone tablet is supposed to rotate clockwise. So please gently tilt soul arts in your hands to mimic its rotation. When viewed from a different perspective, the story upon the tablet unfolds, a tale of the player's fight against Erda, the Fate Weaver. Go which way my wind blows, for if you don't, I will pull the strings and down your curtain rings, and who are you to tempt your fate? The player mounts their chariot and chases Erda on the back of a giant lindworm amidst the clouds. Her skin is made of brass, and she wields a round harp stringed with threads of fate. As you fight, Erda attempts to sing the story of your encounter, summoning storms, controlling your movement, and even shuffling your stats mid-fight. Catch up to her in spite of this, and the fight will crescendo. In Phase 2, Erda stops mid-flight and turns to face the player. Shedding a tear, her body is torn apart, hollowed and deformed into a living orchestra. Her feet are bellows, her torso a tuba, her head covered by a pan flute of horns and topped by a Karnak's war trumpet. Now, the player is chased, fleeing arrows shot by Erda's great harp and wild beasts that dive from the clouds. Who are you to tempt your fate? Nakilavi by Andrei Scherstuck. The Nakilavi is evil incarnate, demon of the Orcadians, terror of the forlorn shores. It's no coincidence that such a being is fought amidst wrecked ships and fallen sailors. This vile creature is a fell omen, a bringer of calamity, famously held responsible for droughts and epidemics. The Nakilavi is best fought on horseback, as it has many tricks that restrict the coastal arena. Its plague breath lingers, locking off certain sections. Fight near corpses and they may rise to claw at the player. Those inclined to dismount form a stationary target, driven mad by the disastrous gaze of its unshielded eye. That last point hides a clue. When its eye closes, one may lure the beast into nearby debris. Combine the wicked eye, hoof, and spine of your defeated foe to craft the Guardenmaw, a powerful great staff that can summon the Nakilavi as a mount. But beware. Long ago, a human merged with it in such a fashion. Such a thing must not happen again, or its terror shall return to our shores. Pesta by Rebecca Wu. In the 14th century, mankind was ravaged by the Black Death, a pandemic said to have taken the lives of up to 60% of the European population. During this age of medieval medicine, the nature of the plague was not well understood. To some, it was punishment from God. To others, it was poison in the wells or bad air. To the Norwegians, the plague was named Pesta. Pesta was their name for the plague, but also their name for an ashen-faced old woman that struck terror into the hearts of any that glimpsed her. This supernatural being travelled from village to village, carrying a broomstick and a rake. If you saw her raking, then it was a sign that she might spare some of your people. But if she was seen sweeping with her broom, then despair, for none would survive. This folklore has inspired the boss to the left, a design that fits well within the open-world nature of Elden Ring. While travelling through various towns, the player may deem the old woman harmless and pay her no mind. When they return, however, they will find many townsfolk dead or dying, fail to recognize the pattern of Pesta's appearance, and many important NPCs will lose their lives. You must confront and defeat Pesta, or her pandemic will rage on. Kelpie by Timothy Kelly. Alone on an island, a child buries her head in her hands and weeps. The sound is so pitiful that many players will trudge to her side without hesitation. If they have played any of From Software's previous titles, then they should be very familiar with such forlorn NPCs. A lowered guard will be their downfall. Between tearful sobs, the child snatches glances at the approaching player. If they come within reach, then her hidden body will drown them beneath the waves. If they hesitate, then the fight begins. The child is revealed to be the upper half of a Kelpie, a water spirit with roots in Scottish folklore. In its first phase, the child continues to weep. As a result, the Kelpie is blind. It lumbers around the stage, searching for the player and striking back whenever it takes damage. Timothy's depiction of this creature makes it unclear whether the affixed child was once a victim herself, or a cruel appendage grown as a lure. Either way, it makes for an unsettling impression. After enough damage, the child gives a harrowing scream. For the sake of survival, she must join the fight. To make matters worse, the spirits of drowned victims emerge to grope at the player. Take them out carefully, or succumb to joining their pitiful horde. Sreng, Guardian of the Sacred Tree, by Alexander Bokhimy Terentev. The opening cinematic plays. You are bleeding out on the battlefield, one arm hopelessly broken. As you lose consciousness, a mist washes away the scene, and the sounds of battle become distant. Suddenly able to move, you stand and stride through the fog, which gives way to a cave, then eventually a beautiful open field. In the distance looms a vibrant red tree, watched over by Sreng, its guardian. You died upon that battlefield. Now the guardian of the sacred tree will judge if you are worthy of rebirth. Alexander's depiction of Sreng is heavily inspired by a piece of Irish mythology. In it, a champion of the same name faces Nuada, king of the Tuatha De Danann. With one mighty blow, Sreng cuts through Nuada's shield and severs his arm at the shoulder. With only one arm, Nuada refuses to fight on. As a result, their conflict is ended. This boss encounter features the same hero from Irish legend, now long dead and residing in the Otherworld. This is the realm of deities, an elusive place that only mythical heroes might chance to see. Here, Sreng guards access to the Tree of Life, capable of granting rebirth. To claim its blessing, you must prove your worth and defeat its guardian. The fight is a typical From Software tutorial battle, tough but with predictable patterns. Seeing the player's condition, Sreng even refrains from using his prosthetic limb. He cannot help but feel a grudging respect for the crippled player who fights on despite only having one arm. Even Nuada, king of the Tuatha De Danann, had not faced him in such a manner. When Sreng is finally defeated, a cutscene plays. Down on one knee and out of breath, he gazes at the player with a look of approval. As mist surrounds him, he manages a final strike, severing the player's useless broken arm. In its place, a metal prosthetic appears, his final gift, but the first of many arms the player will find. Under the sacred tree lies a temple. This place serves the player as a hub world, contextualizing their ability to die myriad deaths. The tree has lost its guardian, but found its hero. Refn, the Forgotten Son, by Stefan Pailua Pauli. This is the story of a child of the gods, Refn, kind and beloved by all. Alas, his father was fooled by an evil oracle, who bore a terrible grudge. "Tell me, oracle," said the foolish father, "will my son live a happy life?" "Alas," said the oracle, "he shall live in great pain." "Oh, oracle, but how can this be?" despaired the foolish father. "Will he at least sacrifice himself for our people?" "No," grinned the oracle, "he shall bring death and sorrow to all the realms. This I have foreseen." Fearing ruin, the foolish father imprisoned Refn, suspending him in a wreath of chains between two mountains in a forgotten land. As the player approaches the mountains, they notice chains at their feet, connected to a rusty sword in the earth. As you approach the sword, the chains snap to life, whipping the player. Reach and destroy this sword to begin Phase 2. Here, Refn partially frees himself and is only able to attack with one arm. It's just as well, for his attacks are frenzied and full of anger. In Phase 3, Refn breaks free at last, eager to take his revenge upon the realms. Luckily, the prophecy is not binding. It was simply a lie to punish a father and son. Marshal your strength to prevent this false prophecy from causing any more harm. The Fisherman, by Antti Hakasari. Take a moment to appreciate the finer details within this piece. The way the boss's hair rises as if underwater, the hook snagged in his left eye, the loose clothing now too large for his gaunt figure. Note the bleak mood, the defiance of the player, and the muted irritation of a hungry giant known only as the Fisherman. Once the lake brimmed with fish, but his voracious appetite ensured the steady decline of their population. Now he rarely comes away with a meal, leaving him hungry, weak, and frustrated. Cross his path and he will take his anger out on you. Be sure to engage the giant on the lake's frozen surface, which cannot support his weight. The deep water slows him, giving you more control of the fight. That said, the giant is cunning, and will strafe a wide, circular path, hoping to cut off your escape with the collapsed ice left in his wake. Stay at range, and you also risk being hooked by the well-practiced cast of his fishing rod. Pierced by its cruel barbs, the giant can reel you in, stunning you with the haft of his hatchet and storing you in his backpack for later. If this happens, the player will soon awaken and have another chance at slaying their foe. Empty stomachs make for poor advisors. Starchild, by Daniel Noblich. Starchild draws inspiration from an Oscar Wilde story of the same name. In it, an infant is found deep in the woods wearing a golden cloak and chain of amber. Every year the Starchild grows more beautiful to look upon, but every year his arrogance grows in equal measure. He despises the other children and makes himself their master, saying they are of lower birth, while he was sprung from a star. To his dismay, a beggar woman then proves that he's her son. Fate punishes him for his cruelty, and his delusions end. In Daniel's tale, the Starchild is found by the Fae, magical creatures that inhabit the forest. Desperate to be one of them, the cruel child goes as far as to rip the wings from other forest creatures to fashion his own. The other Fae children serve him, holding up mirrors so that he can marvel at his own reflection. The player walks through a dark forest. It's gloomy, with the barest hint of moonlight filtering through the trees. Suddenly, they hear wailing. In a nearby clearing, an old woman is begging for the love of her long-lost child. Tormented by the truth of her words, the Starchild lashes out, attempting to kill the poor woman. Intervene, and you must face his frenzy amidst the craven attacks of his fervent underlings. The Nokken by Gregory Holmes. His song is lilting, frightful sweet, a tune to sweep you off your feet. Through the mud your numb feet walk, over paths the dead have stalked. Do not go, sweet child of mine, you will not like what you will find. His true form floats beneath the waves, your death is what the Nokken craves. Folk stories often have a practical value, a reason for being told that helps them spread throughout a community. You may have recognized such stories in this chapter already. Some help to rationalize unexplained phenomena, such as disease or natural disasters. Others teach the value of good morals, such as mercy or honor. The story of the Nokken is common across a wide swath of Germanic peoples, and may well have been propagated to prevent drownings in dangerous bodies of water. The Nokken is a male water spirit, a being that resides in lakes and deep ponds. In many stories, he is a beautiful young man and a talented musician, luring women and children to jump into the water so that he might drown them. He is also said to have a talent for shape-shifting, which helps to explain the many forms he takes, even within this chapter of soul arts. In Gregory's The Nokken, the player is not lured by music or seduction, rather they're drawn in by loot. A cloak, helmet, and gauntlet lie upon the shore, and battle-worn swords protrude from its surface. From here, you may spy a man's upper torso in the distance, forming a sinister silhouette against the sunset. The shore has given you a taste for treasure, and we all know from experience that bosses drop the best loot of all. The Nokken is a master of underwater combat, fighting with wide swipes, a sonic scream, and even a grab attack where the conductor steals HP from the player's own. At multiple stages, you must return to the surface for oxygen, something made difficult as the monster frequently wrenches you deeper into his depths. If you fall to the Nokken, your character can be seen being absorbed into his body, adding to its ominous, writhing crown of failed heroes. The Drowned of Seed by Jonas Mueller. The village of Seed was founded by a lake, picturesque oasis fed by an enormous river that ran through the town. The river was a blessing, but there were those that sought to exploit it. Over time, channels were dug to deviate water, precious farmland, and the waste of their industry was dumped into the water. The town was growing, trade was thriving. The swamp that began to fester by the village was the least of their concerns. One year, folk that strayed from the town started to go missing. Rumor had it that there had been something in the lake, an angry spirit defiled by the filth they had poured into its domain. In the second year, people disappeared from their homes, taken in the night. In the third year, their homes were gone entirely, swallowed by the swamp. The Drowned of Seed is a river spirit inspired by two supernatural beings, the Kelpie, a water horse that drowns those who try to ride it, and the Sloch, a conglomerate of the unforgiven dead. In its first phase, the drowned claws its way to the surface, using bodies to simulate the form of a mounted knight. With myriad arms, it hefts a hunk of jagged stone from the soggy depths and wields it as a mace. In the second phase, pillars of corpses surge skyward as the drowned flails in an amorphous rage. Finally, every single villager fights on behalf of the spirit they defiled. Diseased Guardian Ystrol by Caio Florencio Razira. Once Ystrol was a peaceful being. Though rarely seen, he was known to frequent the Great Lake, blessing those who chanced to see him. Alas, these stories were forgotten when war ravaged the land. Hearts were hardened, and fewer stories were told about Ystrol, guardian of the lake. Seeking a peaceful place to bury the departed, but without time for proper ceremony, folk made a habit of dumping their bodies in the lake. As the wars raged on, the lake became foul, infested with leeches. Overcome by the creatures, Ystrol fell ill. His blood became an acid poison, and his heart became heavy with a deep hatred of men and their wars. The fight with diseased Guardian Ystrol becomes available once the player has killed over 300 enemies, a commentary on the bloodshed that you directly bring to pass. A cutscene plays. Ystrol's angry eyes peek out of the water until he slowly rises, revealing a body laden with leeches. He eventually stands tall, panting a husky breath, pausing only to vomit and roar. During the fight, Ystrul will share his burden, passing leeches over to the player. These are very difficult to remove, remaining attached long after the fight is over. They are a reminder of the torment that Ystrul long suffered. Finally, it is ended. Cultivator Fen by Jordan Eastwood. This story parallels that of Fenrir, the infamous wolf of Norse mythology. As the story goes, Odin foresaw an attack by Fenrir at the very end of the world, and sought to bind him with a magical ribbon, lest his vision come to pass. "O Fenrir," said the gods, "imagine your renown when you break these bindings, for even we cannot break them. Glory will go to you, who is stronger than all the gods." Of course, there was treachery afoot. The binding was Gleipnir, a ribbon crafted by the magic of the dwarves, and the gods had no plans to untie it. "There is no glory in breaking a ribbon. What if this is not a test but a trick, and you refuse to untie me if this binding cannot be broken? Let one of you place his hand in my mouth, to be released once I am free." Of course, Fenrir could not break the bindings, so the gods laughed and would not release him. The one named Tyr lost his hand that day, a small price to pay for the binding of Fenrir. Similarly, Jordan's story tells of a wolf named Fen, who was tricked into consuming a hand inscribed with the runes for harvest and repetition. Now he is bound by countless arms, which are cultivated endlessly within his gut. Veiled Sisters of the Eastern Mounds by Andrew Mironov. After the ring was shattered, the Veiled Sisters descended from the heavens. They are its final line of defense, a safeguard against further damage. The order of the world has fallen, and they wear veils to hide their grief, even though these veils also obscure their vision. True faith is blind, after all. The sisters have come to defend the Eastern Mounds, a burial site where the battle for the ring was lost. If you wish to dig up the truth, then you'll have to get past them, a difficult task. The Veiled Sisters wield Empyrean weaponry and have armor blessed by the heavens. Luckily for you, their flesh has been tarnished and weakened by the shattering. The fight against this trio takes place in an enormous arena, with the sisters floating menacingly overhead. They take turns swooping down on you. If you manage to strike one, she will fall from the sky and continue the fight on the ground, while the others support her from above. Take care to fight them in a favorable order. The first to die will empower her sisters until you're left facing one truly powerful foe. Viscerin, the Black Wing Valkyrie by Jonathan Lee. With this piece, Jonathan's goal was to make Viscerin seem intimidating yet majestic. He achieves this. Her stance is commanding, gloriously silhouetted against the light, yet Viscerin's tail is darker than first appears. Look a little closer and you'll realize that the setting is a dusty cavern, not the sort of place you'd expect to find a Valkyrie. Blackened wings, cruel armor, torn clothing, all of these details betray a fall from grace. Once the glory of the Valkyrie Legion and a protector of the Elden Ring, Viscerin lost everything the day the Elden Ring shattered. On this day, madness gripped her soul, corrupting and bending her thoughts towards the dark. Only her followers knew what she was capable of, so they chained her deep within a mountain cavern where her name was lost for centuries. Outcast and forgotten, now the echoes of the ring call for her service once more. However, this time she is not being called as a protector, she is being called as a destroyer. With sweeps and thrusts of a weapon that was forged to fight evil, Viscerin proves a formidable foe. Her wings grant her true control over the battlefield, and she can beam holy magic from the tip of her spear. Hadriel by Vladislav Nekrasov. Look up at the sky. It burns. As war erupted across the heavens, the earth too was set ablaze. Men destroyed the fields they could never hope to harvest, and pillaged any tool that could be used as a weapon. Hadriel, the goddess of agriculture, was without subjects or purpose. Burned and abandoned, she took up her scythe and learned to fight. Long trails of her flaming hair lie upon the fields, leading to the place where Hadriel rests. She kneels at the center of a pasture, carefully inspecting a patch of undamaged wheat. If the player fights her head-on, she will reach for her scythe and attack with wide sweeps, hoping to force you into her trail of fire. These trails can be removed beforehand if you steal her scythe and cut them before she takes it back from you. Her grab attacks are cautious and predictable, and she frequently envelops herself in a wall of fire, fighting defensively until Phase 2 begins, when her last patch of wheat is ruined. Something breaks inside of her. Now she fights with reckless abandon, a goddess of nothing but fire and ash. Sagir by Mikhail Grzesko. The Vikings of Yorir are the most terrifying foes of all, for they do not fear death. Their berserkers rage into battle, trying desperately to die bravely so that they might dine alongside their god in his great halls. But therein lies their fear. If the rites are not performed and a warrior lies forgotten upon the battlefield, then he may not pass properly into the afterlife. Their names are left behind, free to be claimed by the thing they fear most, Sagir. Sagir is an incarnation of Storm, the taker of names who roams lost battlefields to claim the souls of the fallen. It is said that one day Sagir will take her army and blot out the sun, enveloping the world in endless storms. Her body, eternally whipped by wind, reveals 3 figures riding a masked steed, the cavalier with its curved blade, the archer with its bow, and the footman with its spear. Those claimed by Sagir can be freed, but only if she is defeated. When the weather starts to storm, visit your past battlefields and see if you can chance upon this force of nature. She will take the form of a great whirlwind, whipping across the land, and can be fought within the eye of the storm. Challenge her, but if you fail, know that your soul may be added to her ranks. The Phantom Queen by Christian Reifix Reis. As soon as the game begins, Pesta traces a slow path across the open world, leaving plague and pestilence in her wake. Dark tendrils choke the life from plants, animals become rabid, NPCs stay in their homes. By the time the player is midway through the game, Pesta's scourge should be impossible to ignore. She must be dealt with, find a sign, and chase it to the source. An old woman bent double and encumbered, Pesta's movement is slow, stiff, and crooked. In this first phase, she attempts to fight at range with magic. Infected rats and a poisonous aura should prevent the player from staying within striking distance too long. In her second phase, joints crack and bend to afford Pesta greater mobility. She strikes viciously with the rake and phases behind the player at times. Curiously, her hair has become graceful and divine, floating as if underwater. Her third phase reveals all. Pesta was the Phantom Queen, a goddess of fate transformed to teach humanity a lesson. Finally, she speaks. Thy gods are ailing, rotten, and corrupt. Put us out of our misery, mortal, or share in it. Pesta, Plague Herald, by Jeff Lehnen. The player arrives at Bergen Beach, drawn towards a large shipwreck on the shore. Its architecture is like nothing previously seen, but a dead crew tell no tales. Strangely, there are no signs of battle. Here you pick up odious incense, an item that uses human fat and hair to ward against evil. From the ship, a mysterious trail of black sludge can be found. Perhaps it will lead to answers. The black trail leads south, through the forest, to Jostedal village, a place dripping with black tar, ravaged by plague spirits. One of the villagers is still alive, warding off spirits with a torch. Clearly, they fear fire. Kill the attacking spirits, or sacrifice the villager. Either way, you shall receive the ember torch. Pesta the Plague Herald can be traced to a nearby field, where she stands stoic, preaching to her underlings in a foul tongue. These spirits protect her, preventing you from staying close for any length of time. Defeat too many and she will comb black sludge into the soil with her sober rake, summoning more to do her bidding. In Phase 2, Pesta sinks into the sludge, emerging with her dreaded hallowed broom to swat wildly at the player, splattering them with filth. Here, the plague spirits go on the offensive, matching Pesta's desperation. Use the torch to fend them off, or light grass fires that give you a safe space to fight. When the battle is done, her body explodes, guaranteeing a build-up of plague, a message to you that death is inevitable. Ogum, the Sun-Faced, by Maxime Osti. Irish mythology speaks of a being named Ogma, a bright-faced deity who gave men a language to call their own. He is the father of the Ogham alphabet, but also a champion of the gods, fighting bravely on their behalf. Beloved by men and gods alike, his fall from grace would be tragic indeed. In her piece, Maxime depicts such a fall, interpreting Ogma as Ogum, the sun-faced, whose powers of speech have been sealed behind cryptic runes, condemned to bear a mithril plate until the end of time, he stands jinxed, exiled, and hoping for a fighter mighty enough to break his curse. Ogham's Phase 1 attacks immediately reveal the limits of his power, as his screams are wordlessly absorbed by his mithril blackplate. Even so, he manages to send a blast of thunder from his jaws and works the backplate into his moveset with heavy slams. In Phase 2, the backplate breaks. Ogham rejoices in the breaking of his burden, and a glorious choir is added to the soundtrack. The fight continues. Somehow, he still holds a terrible grudge. His true power is now on display, with a moveset expanded to reveal an ear-splitting array of new attacks. The One-Eyed King by Robin Heisterkamp. Before he ascended to the throne, the One-Eyed King was a druid that lived within a dark forest. The people feared him, but knew he would still cure those brave enough to seek his help. His knowledge was profound, so profound that he was soon appointed to be the king's personal advisor. With influence came knowledge, but the more he learned, the more he realized he did not yet know. So he killed and deposed the king, seeking the authority to conduct more terrible research. His studies turned to the realm of the dead, a place with secrets not yet revealed. He replaced one eye with an artificial one and gazed upon their world, losing all interest in ruling. Unsurprisingly, his subjects became tired of inaction, and he himself was soon poisoned and deposed. When laying him to rest, many noted that the king's dead body behaved strangely. It remained warm, with twitching eyes and a knowing smile. Now that the ring has shattered, the One-Eyed King has returned from the realm of the dead. He rides a many-legged steed, bearing knowledge from beyond. Send him back from whence he came. The Valsakir by Anders Jensen. After great battles are fought, the warriors of the battlefield must be buried and consecrated, lest a Valsakir rise from the dead. Comprised of the regretful dead that perished in battle, the Valsakir dreams of becoming unstoppable on the battlefield. It will challenge anyone who approaches, hoping to take their limbs and increase its own prowess in combat. If the player wanders by the Valsakir's battlefield, they might spy it wandering between corpses, seeking worthy limbs for its collection. There is an opportunity here to initiate the fight from stealth. This fight has two phases. In the first, the Valsakir starts the fight with a spear and axe. Its array of arms gives the creature inhuman speed and reflexes. After fighting for a while, it will hurl its weapons at the player and pick up new items from the battlefield, as if the weapons themselves are to blame for its failure to kill you. In Phase 2, the Valsakir will disregard all chivalry and fight for its own survival, using dark magic to raise the nearby dead. The player must fight multiple foes at once. Luckily, the Valsakir has already claimed the most powerful dead from the battlefield. The corpses that rise are frail and easy to defeat. The Golden Witch by Daniel Piller. Haida had always been a talented witch. 3 times the god executed her for greed, and 3 times she arose from the dead, ever seeking gold. Amused by her avarice, the gods turned her flesh to gold, leaving her slow and burdened. The battle against Haida takes place in a dungeon, where her secrets of witchcraft are kept. The player is drawn towards a golden cauldron that simmers with a purple mist. As they stand over it, the mist will coalesce into a purple head. At the opposite end of the room, a pile of golden metal composes itself into the form of Haida, the Golden Witch. She grabs her halberd, and the battle begins. In the first phase, Haida is weighed down by her golden cauldron, and fights with broad, clumsy stripes, though she is assisted by orbs of magic that constantly fire from the purple mist. In the second phase, Haida drinks the evil brew and writhes with a terrible power. Imbued with greater strength, she is able to hurl the cauldron at the player, swinging it as if it's a ball and chain. After defeating the witch, the player can loot her dungeon, but be warned, for as long as you carry her gold, the Golden Witch will rise and hunt you down. Unseen Lands of Dark Souls. There are so many places in Dark Souls that we hear about but never see. Lands such as Londor, with its hollow civilization and towers said to resemble the thorns of the Morion blade, or Karthus of the Sands, with its warrior culture and giant sandworms beneath the dunes. If only we could travel to the country of Katarina, where the people are drunk and lively, or to the city of Vinheim, a place of magic and intrigue. These places are unseen in the literal sense, and were the most popular lands featured in this art competition. That said, artists were also allowed to include the places in Dark Souls that retain mere traces of their former glory, places such as Izalith, whose unique architecture lies mostly in ruin, or Hade, whose architecture is barely seen at all, only hinted at by what peaks above the waves. If we could restore these lands to their former glory, then I think even the Undead Burg might surprise you. There is great beauty to be found in a ruined thing. A desolate world doesn't just reveal the present, it holds the visual story of what it once was, and how it fell from grace. Environmental clues like these are found all throughout From Software's worlds, so perhaps it's no coincidence that the game's director likes to design such desolate worlds. It will not surprise you to hear that Miyazaki was heavily involved with the design direction of Dark Souls. All designs go through him to ensure a degree of unification, but the game's official design works book explains that Miyazaki would often give artists abstract instructions and encourage their imaginations to eclipse his own. One of my favorite stories has him requesting that the designer of the undead dragon capture the sadness of this great creature as it marches towards extinction. The existing world of Dark Souls has clearly captured some of that poetry. In expanding this world, our artists have a lot to live up to. Age of Chaos by Ricardo Emig. I recall vividly the last day Father and I went to visit Godmother. We were invited to see her new temple complex located far beneath our beloved capital. The path led through the realm of chaos, where her grotesque spawn wander aimlessly, breathing that putrid air thick with cinder and ash. Though most of the giant creatures were barely able to subsist, they quickened the pulses of mortal men who, inspired by fear, came to worship them. They named each creature according to their fears, but there was one word that would define them all: demons. From this demonic pact, the wildest architecture emerged, built without order, tower upon tower, never lasting, ever changing. I held tight to Father's garb, for he was my guiding light through this maze of absurdity. I knew we were being watched. For every step we took, another 1,000 eyes stared back from the darkness. These beings had never seen the sun rise upon their dusty land, so their dazzled eyes stared in fear and curiosity. I returned their gaze in kind. Despite their chaotic forms, they all seemed to share a common goal. They terrified and intrigued me. From afar whispered a promise to end their miserable frailty, and so the new temple too became the destination of their pilgrimage. No one understood flame like Godmother did. When we took to the surface, she stayed behind to conduct research at the site where it first appeared. With her bare hands, she dug down all the way to the tips of the arch tree's root system. What had she hoped to find? And so it was here that she built her kingdom. Before long, her obsessed cult of followers grew strong, for they all sought godhood. She passed on a wealth of knowledge to her scholars, and thus did her Academy of Fire Arts become one of the 3 schools of power. We walked past a new temple that was still being built, but already an uncountable number of kneeling aspirants gathered before the structures to solicit her favor. All worshipped like moths seeking flame, ready to burn themselves if necessary. Their fervent murmur was interrupted by the welcoming ceremonies. We were received in audience by the first high priest ever to learn the eloquence of chaos. In honor of our arrival, we were to witness a play of tribal fire arts. With the understanding of their most primal emotions, they wove flamelets to firestorms and back again in a most rhythmic fervor. It almost looked like they ardently fought one another. With my naive young eyes, I did not notice the obvious demonstration of power that took place before me. The priests guided us. We descended further and entered a chamber they called the womb. In the years leading up to our arrival, many spoke of the progress down below. I was eager to see how far their society had come, but soon my fantasies of new friends and luxurious banquets turned to ashes in my mouth. It was clear that we were not welcome here. At least I got to witness her infamous son. He was a cripple, but nowhere close to the malformed abomination that my bad-mouthed uncles had led me to expect. Godmother's face was set and grim. She must have known father did not come in good faith. He stood before her, his bright presence unveiling all her darkest deeds. He pointed his finger, first leftward, then spanning across the whole room to his right, questioning everything in its path. Why did the high priest's skin bear scales? How could she bestow the gift of fire upon the mortals? Did she not see the impurity of her own son, who... Suddenly her voice rose and burned like fire. Those closest to her were set aflame by voice alone. Her words seared the air, and the hall turned torrid. For a moment, father's light looked like a spark swallowed by a sea of wildfire. She commanded us to leave at once. Father stood silent for a moment. Never did anyone dare question him. He left, not saying another word. It didn't matter how obscene her son was, she loved him nonetheless. He was proof of the resilient miracle that life is. To her, he was perfect. Never in her dreams would she abandon her child. This, my father, would never understand. We marched back outside. The air trembled from the uproar, and the ashfall grew stronger. Still addled with a ringing in my ear, I rushed to match father's pace, only to be distracted by strange lights glowing nearby. My curiosity led me off track to a few scorched souls. One of them approached me carefully, staring with an odd intensity. It was as if he recognized me. He lifted a strange creature from his head and called it his son. These people were proof of what awaited those who played with fire. The curiosity had led them to a world of searing pain and darkness. The only soothing sight was a glimmer of the sun induced by those fireflies, a drug to those who had sacrificed their humanity for a brighter future. It wasn't until I looked into those hollow eyes that I realized those maggots are a parasite, constantly seeking a new host so that they might use another frail body as a breeding ground. Suddenly, my curiosity was disturbed by a ghostly noise from below the temple's surface. A tormented growl reverberated through me. Soon after came the rotten stench of intestines. When I flinched, I fell into the ash and burned my hands. It truly was an eerie place. Wincing, I hastily caught up with father. The mortals who thrived from the rebirth became as willing slaves, swearing to spend their eternity in allegiance to the Great Mother as sentinels of her realm. They were put to work as builders, setting labyrinth upon labyrinth so that outsiders might lose themselves in the spiraling Babel. We were guided all the way up to the outer trade posts, where their land converges with ours. It was the path my kin had taken so many years ago when they first learned to walk upright. The upper districts deigned to provide the underworld with water in exchange for liquid fire to heat their forges. I remember fondly the clanking of smithery echoing around the cave. These folk had grown so large that they were able to forge whole archways like horseshoes on their anvils. I never did hear what became of them. The sun set. It was here that father decided a church must be built to bless these lands with his faith. And when whatever slumbers beneath awakens, ready to feast, and hell breaks loose, only then would the bell be rung. On this somber day, as I write these words, that time has now come, and father heeds the call. Our legions, prepared ever since, have mobilized and will march, not knowing what horrors await them. I fear for you, Godmother. No matter what father expects to find down there, no god deserves to be consumed. Jugo, by Zen Cloud. Thank the gods that you weren't born in Jugo. Here the eternal sandstorm blots out the sun, and few have ever seen its rays unfiltered. I suppose that is a mercy, really. This place is hot enough already. But the worst thing, you cannot leave. Many have tried, but the sandstorm swirls and churns unending. So here we stay, forced to take refuge in the long-abandoned anthills, as our king did long ago. These towers contain every element of our society. The sandstorm might make external travel nigh impossible, but intercity travel is achieved via raised platforms and aerial railways. Enter a tower and the first thing you'll likely pass are our pyromancy schools, where fighters learn the fire arts that are essential when defending the upper settlements against giant ants. Only a steady stream of fire will repel a starving army. Such assaults are common. Thankfully, successfully repelling a raid can be a welcome source of meat and material. The ant carcasses are taken further up the tower to the artisan quarter. Here, windmills generate energy from the unending storm, which we use to grind ant chitin. Its powder can be used to produce many goods, but our pride is aurous ore, which we use to craft armor that, at times, can render its wearer invisible. If only we could trade with the outside world. Just imagine, for despite our plight, we have many marvels to share. Courland, by Pierre Maréchal. The glory of Courland lies perched upon the clouds, a city famous for developing the art of transposition, whereby souls are wrenched from their vessels and given new shape to suit their concentrated essence. In doing so, the true power of a soul can be transferred to a new individual as easily as picking up a spear. In fact, a soul can literally be transposed into a spear, or any object for that matter. Imbued with the power of a soul, these objects take on truly unique characteristics. Imagine wearing impenetrable armor made from the soul of a stone dragon, or drawing the unbreakable bowstring of an archer famous for their resolve. Unsurprisingly, these items quickly became legendary artifacts, and their export drastically increased the wealth of Courland, as well as its callous disregard for human life. A city is no more than the souls of its people, and the souls within Courland became fearful indeed. At night roam soul feeders, a depraved gang of extractors who steal the souls of anyone they meet, hoping to find a diamond in the rough. With their very essence up for sale, it became prudent for the townsfolk to lay low, or engage in self-deprecating acts, taking care never to reveal their own worth. It should come as no surprise, then, that the city above the clouds is a wondrous veneer. Below lies the true city of Courland, rotten to the core. Below, the city lies dormant. Its population has seen a steep decline as souls coalesce into singular beings that seize power from others. Ironically, the soul feeders eventually became such a blight on the population that they themselves became the only souls worth extracting. Then they fought one another until only one soul feeder remained. The player must seek a path to the room of the Great Kiln, guarded by Ciel, guard commander of Courland. Years ago, this powerful knight defended the soul feeder with fire, and sealed its evil within the kiln. Defeat Ciel, and free the soul feeder, so that you might claim its power for your own. Melfiar, by Vincent Letang. Lost in a frost-bitten land mired in heavy mist, the group of exiled sorcerers built their homes upon a mountaintop so that they might see more clearly. Below there was nothing but fog, so they turned their eyes upwards instead. From this impulse, Melfian astrology was born. Before long, the astrologists noticed a bizarre occurrence. Periodically, a light beam would pierce the clouds and illuminate a nearby lake. This light would fuse with the water and create star jelly. While the astrologists obsessed over the light's origins, alchemists refined the jelly into star nectar and marveled at its potential. It could be burnt as fuel, heal all wounds, and the taste was heavenly. The nectar turned out to be so addictive that demand soon outstripped supply, and many were forced to assuage their hunger with the astral waste that dribbled from the sewers of the observatory. Melfian society collapsed, and the astrologists locked themselves away, eyes yet intent upon the cosmos. They were addicts of a different sort. What could they have seen up above to obsess them so? Katarina, by Nolan 192. Described as a jovial country brimming with drink and cheer in equal measure, Nolan's rendition of Katarina brings a note of levity to these dark pages. Read on, and soak in this sun-drenched scene, for such a place would be an impossible destination to explore in From Software's games, and we could all do with a reminder of what we're fighting to preserve. Of all the places Nolan could have chosen to depict in sunny Katarina, he chose a dungeon. You would expect such a setting to be dark and depressing, but instead Katarina's jail is an open-air affair that rarely houses serious criminals. Their main offenders are usually involved in drunken misdemeanors or minor scuffles that resolve themselves come morning. Hungover knights often receive loud musical visits from friends to lift their spirits, and the general public is free to come and go as they please. The lower levels are reserved for the rare cases of serious crime, typically filled with soldiers from other lands. Even then, said foreigners will often succumb to the infectious mirth of their Katarinan cellmates, joining in on song and games. Above the dungeon is the barracks, where knights endure rigorous combat training. While other nations may mock their appearance, at home they are hailed as heroes. Despite their occasional drunken escapades or foolhardy decision-making, they remain steadfast, brave, and extremely capable when roused to action. Long May the Sun Shine. Kareem by Brent Leclice. Like most human civilizations, Kareem serves Lord Gwyn and his Age of Fire, praying that the undead curse might disappear from their lands. To this end, knights are regularly sent out on pilgrimage, partnered with fair maidens in training to become firekeepers. At home, undeath is dealt with harshly, unless you were wealthy enough to transpose your undeath with a purging stone, passing the curse to another, less fortunate vessel. Humans are, after all, helpless against curses, and may only seek to redirect their influence. In truth, curses are a magic of the gods, and can be undone by the gods alone. The real deities of Kareem are goddesses, Velka, goddess of sin, and Scythe, goddess of tears. Such deities help to explain the fame of Kareem, whose champions reckon with sin and atonement. In your travels you would have met such characters, men who would not hesitate to double-cross you, or to denounce your sinful deeds. These travelers hint at the dark underbelly of Kareem, where all wrongdoing can be erased for a price. Astora by Yang Xiaoxian. The mere mention of Astora invoked wistful pangs, and perhaps it was such a dream that drew Henri to this faraway home, known only by name. So reads the item description of the Elite Knight armor in Dark Souls 3, an iconic set given to elite knights of fallen Astora. We are never directly told how Astora fell into ruin, but the fate of the lands tends to match the fate of its knights, who are all eventually found hollowed, or worse. Oscar, Solaire, Henri, these knights of Astora are invariably brave and kind, making them welcome encounters upon your journey. It makes their inevitable doom all the more tragic. This entry imagines the land that could have raised such exemplary knights. While doing research, the artist came across the theory that Astora might have been inspired by French locations, as many characters from Astora have French names. See Anastasia, Solaire, André. The depiction that emerged was of Astora's capital city as a cathedral stronghold, in reference to the old French cathedrals. After all, medieval France was a strongly Catholic nation, and weapons from Astora commonly scale with faith. It makes sense then that the centerpiece of the city might belong to the Way of White. Astora, a glorious city, bathed in eternal sunlight and nestled within verdant mountains, a place that somehow inspires nostalgia, even amongst those who only knew it by name. Kareem by Alexander Bakimi Terentev. "We shouldn't be here," whispered the knight. The maiden sighed. "It will only take a moment, sir." The knight cursed. A Kareem knight must dedicate his entire career to attending a single maiden. Trust him to be chained to the most stubborn one of the lot. He glanced over at the statue she was praying at. The goddess Scythe wept, as she always did. Chains held her fast to a giant hunk of granite. Suddenly, he chuckled. He knew what that felt like. "Are we done here? We are not safe here." "Why does the goddess of tears frighten you so?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "It's not her that frightens me. It's her enemies. They could come at any moment, my lady, and they'll give us all something to cry about. Trust me." He sighed again. Zealots were the worst. The city was embroiled in a religious civil war, with the Archbishop's Way of White on one side and the adherents of Morn and Scythe on the other. Of course, his maiden had chosen the losing side. Just last week, their enemies had carried this statue just outside of the city. What if it was a trap? "Scythe will protect us," his maiden replied. "She is always there at times of tragedy." "Scythe is a demoness," the knight growled. "Ever wonder why she's always there? It's because she guides us to misfortune in the first place." "Silence," she intoned tiredly. "Serve me as Morn serves Scythe, with outstanding strength and unwavering faith." The knight moaned. "He's not just known for that, you know. They say he has a foul temper." She smiled. "Then you admit that you're just like him, after all." Kareem by Karl Hassler. "Aha, taken an interest in her, have you? Well, she's a lost cause. Couldn't even become a firekeeper. After I brought her all this way and got her all ready, she's beyond repair, I tell you." So speaks Aegon, Dark Souls 3's resident knight of Kareem. His contempt for his maiden is second only to Dark Souls' knight Lautrec, who murders the firekeeper for her humanity. Carrying this humanity is a harrowing task. Some maidens are even intentionally maimed to prevent escape. Yet despite the situation, every firekeeper you meet is invariably earnest and kind. In Karl's piece, the unkindled is snatched up by a giant crow and dropped on a flower-laden field at the outskirts of Karim. Here, natural beauty clashes with stoic architecture, a reflection of the tension between the callous knights and their gentle maidens. Up ahead, two such NPCs pay their respects to Scythe, goddess of tears. What fate awaits them outside the city walls? Karim, by Eugenia Lysa. What was the main idea behind your artwork? The first impression we get of Karim is that it is a gloomy land of schemers and manipulators, but as you dig deeper, you understand that it was also a place of way of white and chivalry. So where does the truth lie? With this whole piece, I tried to give an answer to the dual nature of Karim, explaining how it is all united within one territory. What is taking place to the left? This part of the illustration depicts a truly historic moment in Karim's culture. Every year the chosen maiden and knight are blessed by the Archbishop of Karim and depart from Karim to spread the word about their faith. Miracles tell tales of Scythe, the goddess of tears, and Morn, the one who served his goddess with absolute loyalty. What about the image above? This is the statue created by the worshippers of Velka, the goddess of sin. The goddess herself is placed in the center of the composition, holding the legendary Book of the Guilty. She is surrounded with representatives of 4 stages of enlightenment. Who is the woman in the red garb? She is one of the nuns that resides in Karim. She sells miracles to the player, but hopes to become the chosen maiden like all the others. And the woman in black? Rowena is a pardoner serving Velka, goddess of sin. She can absolve your sins for a price, like Oswald of Karim, and sells valuable affidavits and miracles. Why did you choose to place a painted world in Karim? The painted worlds of Dark Souls have always been deeply connected to Velka. Everything related to the goddess of sin and everything that the lords fear is locked away in this painted world of Varia Nor. It's also a place where the guilty might run to escape, so having a painted world hidden within Velka's crypt is no coincidence. Mirror, by Noel Cannon. In the old capital of Mirror, an ancient, well-protected spring produces holy water, but the water has been difficult to acquire ever since Mirror became embroiled by war. So reads the item description of the Holy Water Urn in Dark Souls 2, the game that introduced us to the eastern land of Mirror. Defended by chivalrous knights, but perennially beset by unrest, it's a common theory that their wars are fought in defense of their holy water spring. After all, this miraculous substance can heal, but also scald the skin of undead and hollows. As nations struggle to deal with the curse of the undead, such waters must be coveted indeed. In Noel's piece, the sun has eternally set upon the land of Mirror, plunging the country into an age of dark. Now its spring of holy water has fallen under the protection of Quella, goddess of dreams. After inhaling the incense of the sunless church, the knights awaken in a shared dream. Here Quella blesses the knights and deigns to reveal where they might find the holy spring. Only those who have been blessed in such a manner can find her ruined temple and see through the illusion that obscures it. Karim, by Martin Labourgne. An imposing structure sculpted from dark volcanic stone, the Karim Cathedral towers over the countryside. Built by Earl Astor, it serves as a place of worship for the clergy, but also as a dungeon for the undead, who cannot be safely exiled or put to death. Here, far from prying eyes, terrible experiments have been performed in the name of the greater good. As a result, the Earl has been credited with a great many inventions. Of particular note are the bite rings, which protect their wearer from curses, bleeding, and poison, and the purging stones, capable of absorbing build-up of the undead curse. Alas, the stone itself was once a person, or some other being, and the creation of the bite rings surely required many dreadful trials. Many in Karim abhor the Earl, and have sent armies to depose him, but the narrow bridge to his domain has been designed to prevent a large force from approaching all at once. Earl Astor himself is known as the Impaler, and fights with a long spear steeped in rotten poison. Assaulting his castle is a daunting task. In the end, Karim looks the other way. Removing the accursed Earl is not worth the trouble. After all, it is only human to commit a sin. Karim, by Max Elmberg Sjöholm. The knight cut wearily across the marsh. He was nearly home. It had been a long journey and an important one, as he had been commissioned to escort and settle a firekeeper in a distant land. Alas, she had perished on their journey. He had failed. Briefly, he he considered lying to the Archbishop. What if I pretended that the mission had been a success and that the girl had found her place? No. He quickly buried the treasonous thought. They would surely find out. Even thinking such a thing might be tantamount to sin. Safer then to admit it all before the pardoner and pay the price. He cursed. The 3 undead bastards had surprised them on the road, springing from the underbrush. They had gone for the girl first. Perhaps they sensed that she was replete with humanity, the very thing they themselves lacked. She had fought well, forcing them away with the wrath of the gods while he stuck them with his rapier. It wasn't enough, though, and they had taken her life just as he took theirs. Of course, they would rise again. She wouldn't. Suddenly, his home came into view. This had been his first time leaving Karim, so naturally it was also his first time returning to it. He shuddered. He had, of course, heard the story that the city had grown out of Velka's mind, but he had always thought folk were being metaphorical, not literal. Yet here it stood, erupting out of an enormous skull. Outsiders always joked about how grim the night's people were. Now he knew that reputation was well deserved. Black Church of Londor by Oliver Beck. When I first saw Oliver's Black Church of Londor, I was immediately struck by the technical skill on display. The city is almost photorealistic, emerging gloriously out of the fog as a ray of light chances to illuminate its white towers and cerulean rooftops. Then comes the question, hang on, isn't this supposed to be a black church? A theory quickly follows. The city does look black in the places where clouds and fog lay overhead. Perhaps the truth lies in the eye of the beholder. Those of Londor similarly appreciate the power of disguise. The 3 founders of the Sable Church each wear a billed mask, and their pale shades don golden masks painted with a kindly smile. Furthermore, illusory rings come from Londor, allowing their wearers to take on human form. These rings reveal that the hollows of Londor are wretchedly aged, fraught with deceit, and dubiously secretive. Under these masks, there is nothing more than the face of a darkly shriveled hollow. The reverse is true of their city. A promising future awaits, if they get their time in the sun. Katarina by Son Do. One of the most memorable encounters of Dark Souls 3 takes place with Sigurd at the undead settlement. Here, you 2 unkindled overcome a terrible foe and make a toast to your victory together. You receive 1 Siegbrow from Sigurd here, as if rescuing you from a giant fire demon wasn't enough. Its description reads, "Leave it to Sigurd to discover a drink that even an undead can enjoy. Perhaps his long years spent undead have left him wanting to drain a cup or 2 and revel as if he was still among the living." In Sondo's snapshot of Katarina, townsfolk mill about a sun-drenched courtyard as a large quantity of Siegbrow is hoisted to the tavern above. The mechanism that brings this about is the ingenious invention of a sleepy tavern worker who was tired of hauling the barrels up one by one. It's a cheery slice of life, and a welcome example of what the world might have looked like while the Age of Fire was in full swing. Far off in the distance, domed cathedrals tower over the rest of the city. At the end of the day, Katarina is a land of faith, so these buildings stand taller than any other. Farron Keep by Jonathan Lee. Jonathan imagines what Farron Keep might have looked like long ago. Before there was a festering swamp, perhaps there were clear streams and wildlife. Before the crumbling ruins, surely there was a sturdy keep. Look closely, and upon the bridge you might even spy the pointed steel helms of the undead legion. Such a sight was a dire omen in those days, for if that army was marching your way, then agents of the abyss must also be close at hand. The undead legion was a roaming caravan of undead, sworn by wolf's blood to contain the abyss. Farron was a place for these nomads to call home. Alas, after the legion's watchers became lords of Cinder, the wolf blood dried up, and Farron was consumed by a festering wood. The legion was taken by the abyss. Its followers were left without a home or purpose. The only humans that remain in Farron today are its loyal watchdogs, who fight on to defend the sanctity of its sleeping warriors. New Londo by Jonathan Lee. With a similar approach to that of Farron's Keep, Jonathan struck out to envision New Londo before its inevitable flooding. Here we lay eyes upon a cult-like society hidden deep underground. Statues of the wise four kings stand by as a parade of crimson-robed sealers descend a stair leading from Velka's own temple. The goddess of sin is well placed here. New Londo is a nation of undead located directly beneath Firelink Shrine. Its location is surely no coincidence. Undead are excellent kindling for the first flame, and the gods of Anor Londo must have sought to make good use of them. Of course, the dark soul of man proved too difficult to control. Luckily, a way to ruin the city had been ready as a failsafe since its very inception. A single key would seal its fate. The sealers flooded New Londo to banish the Dark Wraiths and the Four Kings. The agonizing decision was made with the realization that countless lives and the robust culture of the city would be lost. Londor by Lorenzo Van Poel. Londor is ancient, but some of its hollows are even older. Their humanity can be traced back to the times of the first sin, when the fire was linked and their fate was taken. In undeath, your ambitions dull, love dies, and memories fade away. All is lost, and yet all of these things were granted by fire in the first place. What came before? Perhaps it is the hollows who wear the true face of man. At the heart of Lorenzo's city lies the Sable Church, founded by the three sisters, Yuria, Lilian, and Elfrida. These women noticed that hollows possess an unflinching dedication to the behaviors they had in life, whether they were soldiers, priests, or sorcerers. To them, hollows weren't mindless automatons, but instead held a deep desire to go on living. Through their teachings, the hollows of Londor learned to live again. Their home is carved from the hollow of a dead tree. From undeath, new life shall bloom. Upon their descent, the player discovers a stupendous array of life, from overgrown hollows to walking trees and other peculiar life forms. The hollows of Londor believe that, in time, all things may be transformed by nature into the next state of being. They implore those who feel thoroughly hollow to enter their new Eden of the underworld and experience what lies beyond. Londor by Ernesto Oporto. This story of Londor is told through item descriptions, which players will encounter throughout their journey. Ash storms ravage the wasteland of the old world, swirling amidst empty homes and shrines. Survivors of this age required better foundations, so the great city of Londor was built into the solid stumps of arch trees, handful of ash. The homes of the lower class are perched precariously upon hollowed roots, while the upper class live on solid ground. It may be the end of the world, but nothing has changed after all. Cracked roof tile. According to an ancient prophecy, travel north at the sign of extinct wings overhead. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones. Far away, our lord has awakened. Londor shall be whole again. Spine of a wyvern. The Sable Church recognized the sign of true awakening and decided to release the ceremonial red smoke. All of Londor rejoiced that day. Sometimes even a hollow can be happy. Red incense. Melfia by Reuben Lane. It was the night of the Great Conjunction. Excitement was in the air. This evening the stars would rotate into perfect alignment, lining up in a way that only occurred once every 10 lunar years. It was in this moment that the astrologists believed power could be taken from the cosmos. Pyromancer Glocken arrived late to the festivities, as he always did. Before him stood a monumental armillary sphere, flanked by a harmless inferno conjured by the talented pyromancers. It was a spectacular sight. And tonight shall be a spectacular failure, he thought dryly as he moved into the courtyard. The astrologists had been trying for generations to acquire sorcery from the stars. Not once had they succeeded. Why should tonight be any different? Students milled about excitedly, mingling with his fellow masters and debating whether this evening's event would be a success. Their smiles were cloying. Glocken rolled his eyes. Most pupils were desperate to impress their masters, hoping to earn the quartz ring that signified their advancement in the Melfian Magic Academy. A few students gave Glocken sly nods. This year he had sought to undermine the rituals of the masters and had shared hundreds of quartz ring replicas with the students. The masters had been outraged, of course, but it bothered him little. Unlike the spectacle before him, those rings were a real miracle. They boosted the wearer's resistance to fire, lightning, hexes, and magic. Imagine how many lives they could save. More importantly, thought Glocken, word of them will spread to other lands. I will become rich, and Melfians will gain renown for creating wonders, not pointlessly staring up at the sky. New Londo by Ung Hanyang. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, walks slowly through the streets of New Londo, followed by an entourage of silver knights. Never before has such a heavenly being deigned to walk amongst the undead. His procession cuts through the markets, towards the upper city, and into the great hall. He has come to give the four kings a part of his soul. New Londo is an undead city, welcoming to all that share the curse. Indeed, we can even spy knights of Katarina and Astora in the pictures above. This melting pot of cultures was nonetheless unique, venerating the red-garbed sealers who dealt in remedies, and knighting black-suited dark wraiths for their protection. At the head of them all were the four kings, given their ranks by Lord Gwyn himself. Therein lies the clue to this city's demise. The title of Four Kings translates to officials or public kings in Japanese, making it clear where their loyalties were supposed to lie. New Londo was intended as a vassal state to the gods. Its very name is in thrall of Anor Londo, and further proof of that, Gwyn wanted to control a nation of undead. Why? Well, Firelink Shrine is built so very nearby. Perhaps the intent was to corral the undead and funnel them towards the kiln. Undead make excellent kindling for an age of fire, after all. When the four kings learned the truth, they sought not to advance an age of dark, but were instead driven mad with power and rage. When we venture to New Londo in-game, we find a city drowned and ruined. Ghosts roam the sodden streets, spirits born of grudges against the sealers that betrayed them. Dark wraiths abandoned their humanity in pursuit of the dark souls of their kin, and the four kings disappointed even the serpent that tempted them. The Great Swamp by Undis Rainbergs. When creating your character in Dark Souls, you are given the opportunity to select a race. Scroll through the presets this menu provides, and you will eventually come across the face of one who hails from the eerie Great Swamp. This face is peculiar, to put it politely. Indeed, the description below it admits as much, stating that Great Swamp heretics face prejudice for their atypical looks. The Japanese description for this section elaborates further. Prejudice gives birth to heresy, and heresy travels to the Great Swamp. The most common type of heretic to inhabit the Great Swamp is the pyromancers, who are heavily stigmatized in the outside world for their obsession with fire. This might seem strange, considering their existence within Gwyn's Age of Fire, but there is a significant difference here. To Gwyn and his followers, fire is sacred. To a pyromancer, fire is something to be held, coveted, and used. It is surely for this heresy that pyromancers were cast out as heathens and forced to dwell far away from other human lands. For the shamanistic pyromancers, the Great Swamp was the ideal place to practice their obsession. After all, fire is the source of life, and the swamp is an abundant source of life and nature. The outside world would never visit such a place, but to the outcasts, it was home. The Great Swamp by Zachary Gord Perrett. Zachary's story of the Great Swamp features Salaman, the master pyromancer, a character mentioned in the many item descriptions and dialogues of Dark Souls. According to a 2012 IGN interview with Hidetaka Miyazaki, Salaman has an important role, along with the Witches of Izalith, in the story of pyromancy, rather than in the story of Dark Souls. Pyromancy is an art propagated by the sharing of flame. Indeed, this is the only way to acquire a pyromancy flame in Dark Souls, unless you start as the pyromancer class. Originally, the Witch of Izalith shared her flame with her daughters, and the eldest of these, Quelana, eventually shared her flame with a man named Salaman. Salaman was her pupil, and many of the pyromancies we cast are of his invention, or that of his own pupils. In Quelana's own words, the little rascal really made something of himself. In Zachary's world, the Tree of Life grows deep within the Great Swamp, its roots nurtured by the life-giving flame of Master Salaman. In this haven, denizens of the swamp are safe from the rot and the evil creatures that creep at their doorstep. At the heart of the tree lies the egg of an ancient dragon. Salaman believes that it will hatch like a seed sprouting from rotten fruit and burn away the rot. Vinheim by George Bennett. The knight gazed at the ivory city in fear and wonder. The first spire of Vinheim had appeared on the horizon long ago, tricking him into thinking his journey would soon be at an end. At that time he had caught glimpses of a beast flying through the sky, but had thought that it was surely a bird or a trick of the light. Now, standing before the city, there could be no doubt. It was a dragon. The knight stood dumbfounded. He had done ample research before journeying here. How had he missed the part where Vinheim tamed an actual dragon? Of course, he knew about their dragon school, but from all accounts, that name was merely inspired by Scythe, the grandfather of sorcery. The sorcerers of the dragon school revered the creature, as he had laid a path for them to follow. Perhaps, he mused, the dragon is an illusion? The spies and assassins of the dragon school had a reputation for oral decoys, why not visual ones? If the goal was to keep outsiders away from Vinheim, well, it was working. He had come here seeking magic blacksmiths to upgrade his weapons, but it seemed less important now. The knight gauged the distance between him and the city. Being caught in the open would mean certain death. Suddenly he grinned. It was a good thing he was undead. New Londo, by Felix Tisch. Built within an enormous fissure, the city of New Londo houses a vast population of humanity. The design of the city tells us a lot about the insecurity of Gwyn, who commanded it be built. First, the city is eternally bathed in light, thanks to hundreds of miniature suns captured in magical enclosures. These serve as a reminder of Gwyn's favor, but they also betray his fear of the dark. Second, the city is split into 4 districts, each belonging to one of the 4 kings. Splitting power in such a way ensures that mankind stays divided, even when they are together. Lastly, the city is built suspended above a deep river. At any moment, the city is close to being wiped out, in case Gwyn's experiment here goes awry. Londor, by Holdsworth Hands. Holdsworth Hands envisions Londor as a cold and quiet place where lanterns light the eternal night. Here, a set of familiar characters are truly at home. Can you find them all? A pilgrim walks the snowy streets, but can they still be a pilgrim if they are yet in Londor? Perhaps they are only just setting out on their journey north to find the unkindled at the end of the world. By a fountain that looks like the sword of a vowel, Sir Wilhelm stands placid. This hollow knight served the 3 sisters who founded the Sable Church, but was particularly loyal to the eldest. Perhaps it is she who stands at the street corner, conversing with a pale shade. Garbed in white and wearing a sneering gold mask, these harlots of death will do anything for the Sable Church of Londor. Behind them, a hollow sits feckless on the street. A lack of purpose can strike anywhere, even in this sanctuary for their own kind. Demon Souls' 6th Archstone. There are 5 worlds to explore in Demon Souls: Boletaria Castle, the Stonefang Tunnels, the Tower of Latria, the Valley of Defilement, and the Shrine of Storms. We travel to these places via their archstones, great gifts given to the rulers of each land by the monumentals. One to the king of a small yet diligent land, one to the king of the burrowers underground, one to the wise queen of the great ivory tower, one to the chieftain of lost and ill-fortuned souls, one to the shaman of the tempest-worshipping shadowmen, and the last to the great giants of the northern lands. But hang on, that's 6 archstones. Thus, there must be 6 worlds. Indeed, cut content left in the game's files reveals that a world called the Northern Limit was cut early in development. Thanks to the efforts of modders and hackers, this cut content has been extensively showcased, exposing fans to a selection of beastmen, human mimics, a giant yeti, and more. Efforts have even been made to mod the location into a more finished state, though the experience of actually exploring this place leaves much to be desired. Enemies are spread out, parts of the map are labyrinthian, and NPCs have little dialogue. As if to reflect this, the 6th Archstone itself is hopelessly broken in-game, its many shards strewn upon the staircase of the Nexus. Thus, the idea for a new art competition was born. Previous competitions had limited the scope of artwork to a weapon, or a boss, or a land, but this was the first time that artists were invited to draw anything they liked. The only limit was that it had to exist within the Northern Limit. At first, I worried that I might have stifled the artists too much by forcing them to design around a specific location, but I was wrong to fear. The Archstone of the Northern Limit has been mended, and its world is now yours to explore. Northern Peak Castle by D. Raw. The Archstone leading here has been destroyed. Unable to warp, you make the journey on foot, hoping to be warmed by the braziers that glow within Northern Peak Castle. On the way, you are attacked by owl sorceresses, humanoid beasts wielding wooden catalysts. They cast with wide, elegant gestures, moving lithely despite the extreme cold. Make it past their ranks and you will find Moru, the elder giant. Once, Moru stood alongside his kin as a leader of the Northern Limit. Now, their Archstone lies broken, and Moru is nothing more than a boss that must be defeated. When the second scourge hit Boletaria, the Northern Limit was the first frontier. Unable to fend off the relentless horde of demons, Moru hefted his giant cleaver and crushed the Archstone, hoping to stop the scourge's spread to other kingdoms. Tragically, this only delayed the inevitable. Moru, now corrupted by the deep fog, sits between the vacant thrones of his kin and awaits the slayer of demons. The first phase of the fight shifts between elegant and wild as Moru drifts between humanity and corruption. Deep fog pours from his sinistral side, damaging the player over time if they strafe to the right, and driving them into the deadlier attacks from his cleaver if they strafe to the left. In Phase 2, Moru hurls away his weapon and completely loses his sanity. Fully corrupt, he pounces at the player, attacking with wide swipes and ferocious bites as the arena slowly fills with that terrible fog. The Giants by Zen Cloud. Somewhat ironically, this tale entitled The Giants begins with the Pygmies, a small race who lived in the Northern Limit long before any other. What they lacked in physical strength, they made up for with an innate magic called flesh shaping, which involves consuming the deceased and regurgitating white mud to sculpt the otherworldly giant beings that might best serve their needs. There was Aki, the beacon, who guides lost travelers, Makoto, the silent sentinel, guardian of the Northern Limit, Sen, the forest guardian, wisest of them all, Tomo, the burrower, friendly to humans, and Kazu, the tower, the oldest giant, and the first to be created. Long ago, Kazu had thousands of pygmies living inside of him, but that was before the Soul Wars, which precipitated the fall of the giants. The human king Ulf desperately needed an heir, and so, with the flesh shaping of the pygmies, he created one. Its name was Riddell. However, in a twist of fate, Ulf had a trueborn son a year later named Bragi, who was revised to be heir to the throne when the true story behind Riddell's creation was revealed. Upset at the nature of his own existence, Riddell fell under the sway of a demon in disguise, who persuaded him to fabricate a story about how the Northern Limit planned to attack Boletaria with the Soul Arts, and so began the Soul Wars. The Soul Wars awoke the Old One, triggering a demon war that wreaked further havoc upon the land. The Alkin succumbed to demonic corruption. The Snorlfear fought back by creating berserkers, and the Sormir cutthroats thrived, switching sides for gold, devouring the natives whole. Angered by Riddell's betrayal, King Ulf sent him to fight on the front lines. The Pygmies created a mighty steed named Esper to assist Riddell, but it was no use. The forces of the Northern Limit were defeated by Boletaria, and their king, Alant, invaded Ulf's halls. Alant shattered Ulf's soul into tiny fragments, which manifested throughout the land as beastly apparitions. Fearing King Alant, the Maiden in Black teleported the Nexus far away. The worshippers of the Old One saw this as a betrayal, and began to use the Soul Arts without supervision. This led to the awakening of the Old One and the Demon Wars. During this age, the Pygmies were forced to create all kinds of creatures to face the demons. Long ago, they had created the Snorlfear, led by Lady Astrid, and now they sought to create berserkers who could shapeshift into greater beasts. Alas, the war was lost. Now only 2 pygmies remain. Furtively, they work on their final creation, a new sleepy giant named Dormir. Riddell's Archdemon by Sebastian Francini. King Alant was tasked with protecting the northern land of the giants. Instead, he spent his days searching for its treasure. A magical source of power lay dormant within those mountains, and Alant sought to claim it as his own. Hidden deep within the tallest mountain was the Old One. After countless expeditions, he found it, or rather, it found him. Shortly after Alant was lost, a scourge of demons swept across the land. Soon, only one garrison of Boleadorian soldiers remained. They were led by Lord Riddell, the king's own brother, but his force had begun to lose hope. In desperation, Riddell's own wife departed for the mountain to try and acquire the magical power that Alant had lost himself to. While sneaking through the mountains, she learned that the giants there were being prepared as sacrifices to the beast known as the Old One. The knowledge drove her mad, and, like Alant, she would never return. Riddell suspected that his wife had left for the mountains and searched for her there. After slaying countless demons, he found one of note, the Maiden in Black. She gave him a token that only he could recognize, a gold ring belonging to his wife. Thus he learned that she was not dead, but had lost her mind and succumbed to the Old One. It had found her to be a worthy vessel, pushing her to enslave and sacrifice the remaining giants. The northern limit now festers under the oppression of her dark arts, which have deformed its human residents and turned the animals into hellish beasts. All now feed on souls, so Riddell made the decision to destroy the Archstone of the northern limit in an attempt to isolate his wife from the world. He would travel to the land of Latria for wisdom, but the demons had beaten him there, so they kept him imprisoned until the end of his days and beyond. Now the mountains are filled with the lonely moans of giants, as their immense souls are harvested to feed the Old One. Alant is its pet, and Riddell's wife its puppet. Only if she is slain might the giants be freed and their world be mended. The Iron Baroness by Titanilla Peatsvor. Once the wife of a powerful baron, the Iron Baroness readily became his widow after she murdered him, craving power. Years later, the deep fog swept over the land and latched onto her ambition, the potential for a powerful servant, indeed. The Iron Baroness is the guardian of the Linchpin Temple and the first boss that the player will face in the Northern Limit. Upon entering the temple, the Baroness advances slowly towards the player, and the fight begins. Her weapon is an ornate battle halberd, decorated with blue gems like the rest of her armor. The halberd leaves an icy mist in its path, causing frostbite, and due to its length, the Baroness can strike from long distances, forcing the player to dodge often. As if that wasn't enough, she can summon a flock of shadow birds from under her cloak, which, unless killed, will continually seek out and attack the player. Her weakness is her charged attack, where she attempts to summon a bed of deadly icicles. Left unchallenged, this spell will overwhelm the player. The temple is filled with would-be giant slayers, frozen to the floor where they stand. Will your fate be any different? The Great Ravine by Caio Florencio Razzira. The Great Ravine cuts through the icy wasteland of the north, linking Boleadora to the city of the giants. Though it has seen its share of conflict, the path was vital for trade and transport, as giants and humans alike walked within its walls. In recent years, travelers would often remark on the strange scent upon the air. It left a metallic taste upon the tongue, and could cause nausea and respiratory complications. Still, many thought it safer than braving the blizzard above. They were wrong. In a rare conflict between humans and giants, weapons sparked and triggered an explosion of flames that traveled the entire length of the chasm. All within were killed instantaneously. If any had survived the inferno, they might have heard a wild screeching echoing from the deep. According to the human scouts, a so-called putrid cockatrice had been trapped below, and was the source of the flammable gas that had pooled in the ravine. In the absence of humans and giants, new life has taken hold. Scorpion ants scuttled to the surface, disturbed by the explosion. The imps have become bold and seek to expand their territory. Even the frostbite hounds have traipsed down to the valley, drawn by the scent of burnt flesh. No group, however, has benefited more from the cataclysm than the Scavenger tribe. The Scavenger tribe is a race of fragile creatures that took refuge in the northern lands long ago. They possessed great cunning, scraping out a meager living by crafting tools and taming the native wildlife, though they had always envied the strength and civilization of the giants. In truth, it was the tribe who lured and trapped the putrid cockatrice in the depths of the ravine long ago. Patiently, they had waited for its concentrated gases to fill the valley. Armed with a haphazard array of weaponry and armor scavenged from fallen soldiers, the tribe has finally come to dominate the Great Ravine. They are not skilled fighters, but they do not need to be. With villages built on stilts to avoid the boiling geysers, they shoot projectiles, lay traps, and unleash their dogs upon any that stray too near. Intruders are captured and taken to the lair of the putrid cockatrice, whom they have come to worship. They have it to thank for their auspicious fate. The Twisted City by Timothy Kelly. I had a life once, a family. That life was stolen away. One night I felt an inexplicable dragging, a tagging at my soul to go north. As I tracked past the northern limit, I lost all sense of time. Flashes of lucidity cut through moments of terror and cold. A fear gripped me that I did not know, and evermore my journey became incomprehensible. I remember towering stone structures, frozen wastes, blackness, and then, out of that terrible fog, a city. It was warped, bent by unseen hands. Behind the shimmering landscape, through mist and snow, I felt her. I came to call her the Weaver, for the world she made had been woven from the fabric of an existing one. In the shadows I felt her presence, the queen who had made this place her dwelling. The city was beautiful. I felt connected to it. I understood what it was and what it had been. It was the city of the giants, but it was not the same. The Weaver had twisted it, along with its inhabitants. They stood outside the city in shadow and fog. I felt their forlorn gaze. Remnants of their old pride remained, bits of armor and feather left behind as a cruel joke. Within the shadows of the city, things changed. The walls became trees, roots quaking with desire to devour. I latched onto things I knew to stay grounded, a piece of grass or a rock, but those things too were twisted. I kept finding myself staring into the dark, a part of me desperate to go deeper. Even now I yearn to return to that place, despite the fear. I am eager to feel her again. As some believe the Old One to be a mercy upon humanity, so too do I believe the Weaver to be responsible for bringing something new into the world. For now, she resides beyond reach and recognition, atop the tower she has woven. Soon you all shall see. The Fortress City of Angrand by Oscar Sjostedt. The cut content from Demon Souls takes place in a northern hinterland of icy mountains, somewhere at the limits of human-inhabited land. Oscar's Fortress City of Angrand is that northern limit. Here, the player journeys through a wild, untamed space. This open world is a major departure from the level design of other stages in Demon Souls, which serves to reinforce just how much of the world has been erased by the fog. Outposts and villages have been overtaken by nature, their citizens consumed long ago. Those who linger now walk the ice-choked ruins as hollow shades, pale and slack-jawed as they clutch onto the tools they knew in life. At the edge of the known world sits the great fortress, a testament to the glory and might of Boleadora at its prime. Beyond, an endless expanse of stone and ice extends as far as the eye can see. The Astray Knight by Ung Hanyang. According to the Monumental, the sixth Archstone of Demon Souls was given to the great giants of the northern lands. In-game, this Archstone is broken and inaccessible, but if you look carefully, you can see a sort of horned figure carved into the stone. It's this being that Ung interprets as the Giant King. According to Ung, the Giant King was loved by all, but was seduced into war with Boleadora. He fought valiantly alongside his fellow giants, but was mercilessly slain. Now he and his kin are forever forgotten. The giants of Demon Souls really were forgotten, as their northern lands only feature in the game's cut content. Hacking into these cut map files allows us to explore a hinterland of icy mountains, where cut enemies are placed haphazardly upon featureless tundras and stark temples. Even here, however, no giants can be found. Apart from the Monumental's dialogue, mention of the giants can only be found in item descriptions. For instance, the weapon Brammed was said to be wielded by an old giant killer. Thus, at some point, the giants were likely the enemies of humanity. In this piece, Ung reveals the devastating aftermath of such a war. Commander Hute led the Boleadorian assault against the Giant King and amassed more kings than anyone. Amongst his troops, he was known as the Giant Slayer. Glory and commendations awaited him at home, but strangely, Hute deserted the army at the close of their campaign and never returned to Boleadora. Some say that he was blinded by his hatred of giants and stayed behind to slay them all. As the player explores the area, they will discover a multitude of headless giants lying in the snow. Trails from their bodies lead to Hute's boss room, where the heads lie neatly upon the ground. Each has a giant weapon embedded behind them as an improvised tombstone. Hute did not stay behind out of bloodlust, he stayed out of guilt. With this final effort, the Astray Knight pays respect to his fallen foes, and vows to vanquish anyone who would trespass here, as he once did. After all, war does not determine who is right, it determines who remains. The Widower, by Icy. Dear Iram, in my previous report I wrote that I would surely meet my ends in these godforsaken mountains. I still have no doubt of that, though what my cause of death will be now causes me some consternation. As I wrote yesterday, the cities we once knew have been swept away by the fog, as if they were erased from history itself. I had found no soul, save for the beasts that hunt me in the night, until now. This morning I looked down from my camp upon a snowy dune, and thought my eyes betrayed me. There stood a masked, man-like creature, gaunt, dark, and freakishly tall. Its skin had been burnt by the freezing snows, and the grooves on its body had cracked. Despite this, it did not bind itself in cloth, save for a few rags. In defiance of that basic need for warmth, it did not move or shiver. Around it stood a crowd, loitering on its heels. Some shuffled in circles, some sat in the snow and wept, and others were struck with frequent fits of spastic violence. The towering creature paid these husks no mind, except to swat away any that came too close to a mound of snow. Only then did I realize that it wasn't a mound of snow, it was the corpse of another giant. It looked to be female in its form. As I was distracted, I turned my eyes back to the masked creature. It appeared to be looking directly at me, and in a moment of sheer panic I ran. Now, back in my camp, I tried desperately to convince myself of my safety. I was so far away. Surely I could not be seen. I miss you, Aram. I wish you were here. Despite my fear, I feel as if I have slept. I must have, for now I recall a dream. Or was it a vision? From my high place I once more spied upon the demon below, and the husks were looking straight up at me. As one, they cried out, "Brother, come down." Vilward Hamlet, by Jonathan Gregory Bick. The story of Vilward Hamlet is told through item descriptions, which players will encounter throughout their journey. A well-worn shield used by the aristocratic White Dragon Knights of northern Boletaria. Dragon Knights were expected, above all, to fight bravely on behalf of the people. Northern Kite Shield. Attire of the Impalers, the imposter knights of the Black Cathedral. The Impalers believed that a great sacrifice was required to appease the gods and survive the bitter cold. These heartless knights were the first to turn on their people. Impaler's Hood. Soul of the demon sage Vakishas. Sage Vakishas sacrificed everything, but in the end he was left only with a bitter and biting cold. Frigid demon soul. Sage Vakishas believed that the soul arts should not be shared with mankind, and went to war with his own people, for he knew the darkness within himself, and thus did he know the frailty of man. Soul Discus. Royal Guards of the Northern Limit, by Ab Wink and Rain Love. The giants, in their perpetual arrogance, underestimated the demon threat. Before they could muster their capital's defenses, the demons raged across their lands. The giants fought well, but in vain. All was lost. Unwilling to accept his defeat, the king locked himself away in the throne room and ordered the 2 royal guards to hold their positions outside. No other humans remained, and the demons had largely moved on, but to this day Ofran and Grad defend against any that still roam the northern lands, forever guarding their lonely monarch. After Ofran died, Grad knew that he could not hold their position on his own. Invoking a forbidden incantation, he channeled Ofran's spirit, and the 2 became one. Now their shared power is a force to be reckoned with. The focused iron defense of Grad is almost unbreachable, and Ofran is free to attack through him with ghostly strikes of impossible speed. Unfortunately, this act of unification destroyed their mind and left them with only one clear memory: defend the king. In Phase 1, Grad and Ofran favor defense, playing a battle of attrition as they attempt to dissuade the player's assault. In Phase 2, Grad runs to Ofran's corpse and drops the shield in favor of dual-wielding with Ofran's halberd. Ofran channels a ghostly version of Grad's shield, and the nature of their assault has reversed, and the player must quickly adapt. Giant of the Archstone, by Angelica Donarini. The broken 6th Archstone within the nexus of demon souls once led to the Northern Limit, an icy wasteland that makes up a large percentage of the game's cut content. According to the prologue on a long-removed website, the king of the northern country Boletaria, Alant, discovered a giant linchpin temple in a hinterland of icy mountains at the limits of human-inhabited land and acquired soul arts. It seems logical that the giant linchpin temple is the nexus, and that the limits of human-inhabited land is the aforementioned northern limit. An important player in Alant's raid upon the nexus would have been Lord Riddell, who, in Demon Souls, we encounter locked up in a Latrian cell. According to his Dull Rat's ring, he was known as Little Alant, which suggests a connection to King Alant. Furthermore, the description of his weapon reads, "One of Lord Riddell's most storied exploits is his theft of this weapon from the Witch in the Sky. Surely this Witch in the Sky is the Maiden in Black, who resides in a floating temple and favors a staff that looks very similar to Riddell's own." Angelica's piece is inspired by this raid upon the northern limit. According to her, this assault was seen as a betrayal, and the Giant of the Archstone was appointed to repel outsiders, guarding the land from would-be intruders. Giant Slayer Melchior by Matthew Gagnon. King Alant's war on the Giants created a desperate need for specialized knights, warriors with the tools to combat the massive strength and size of their foes. In this time of great need, the chivalrous knights of Boletaria were taught by the learned scholars of Latria. Military expertise was combined with magical tuition, forging a unique fighting force known as the Order of the Mage Knights. The Mage Knights wield weapons designed by Jari, the renowned magical craftsman. A favorite is the Snake Spear, capable of casting sorceries and made to inflict deep wounds at a safe distance. These weapons are paired with curious armor, fashioned in a pointed style, as to be instantly recognizable on the battlefield. When they are not fighting upon the icy wastes, Mage Knights will often don their winter coat to prevent heat escaping from chinks in their armor. The player encounters Giant Slayer Melchior wandering the northern limit. He will impart his unique sorcery once his quest is complete. A notable member of the Order of the Mage Knights, Melchior was trapped here when the Archstone was destroyed. The Fall of Jurgelmere by Zachary Gord Perrett. Beyond the colorless deep fog, the elder giant wanders aimlessly, towering over the villages of man, more ancient than the mountains. Long ago, Jurgelmere journeyed to the villages of Reisenbach, mankind's settlement upon the outskirts of the northern limit. Exhausted and wounded, he wished to warn the menfolk of the oncoming danger. A colorless fog was spilling across the northern border, and with it the demon scourge. It had toppled his brothers and turned them to monsters. Little hope remained. It was before the settlements that Jurgelmere decided to make his final stand. He let out a mighty, anguished howl, so immense that it was thought to have cracked open the very earth. He readied himself for the demon horde, and the fog swallowed him and the valley into the colorless abyss. Many years later, the Slayer of Demons discovers what became of this great and noble warrior. His armor brittle and broken, Archdemon Jurgelmere wanders blankly through the countryside. And yet, the villages of man still stand, untouched by demons. Murden Temple by Wes Fraser. Minister Frollo would often stand at the edge of Murden Temple and gaze out at the empty mists where half a world once stood. The first scourge had nearly wiped out civilization itself, but for the minister, this event had only served to increase his own importance. As one of the last remaining masters of the soul arts, he had been well provisioned by the power-hungry King Alant XII. Finally, he was free to experiment on the surviving tribes of giants, with his lordship's warrant, of course. It did not come as a surprise to him when the second scourge arrived, sweeping in from the north with the deep, colorless fog. Minister Frollo and his devout monks were thought to be the first of the demon's victims. Thus, the surviving temple knights of Holy Murd sing mournful songs of nostalgia for their lost homeland and its jovial, portly saint. They were wrong to assume his demise. The second scourge obscured the path to Murden Temple, but the temple itself has not been lost. Now, replete with souls and devoid of morality, the minister has extended their experimentation to include the temple knights and the shrine maidens. Minister Frollo and his monks have become demons, yes, but that has done little to change their nature. Some wonder if they had turned into demons at the advent of the first scourge, not the second. Silent Path by Makiej Janik. The giants are not like mankind. For one, they rarely speak, which makes communication between the two races difficult. What's more, they live in the frozen wastes of the northern limit. To survive in this harsh climate, the giants use their signature soul arts, a sort of druidism that allows their souls to inhabit the world around them. Many curious adventurers travel to their land seeking these strange powers, but few have returned. Seeking favor with the giants, the Boleadorian king paved a silent path to their lands and built them a great castle, hoping to trade with their region. However, the king's gift castle remained uninhabited. The giants did not need a place to hide from the elements, nor did they see the value of material wealth. In the end, the gift became an outpost of human civilization, from which the Boleadorians sought to pierce the icy veil of the northern limit and learn more about its inhabitants. When mankind saw what lurked in the mists, conflict became inevitable. They had thought the Old One and its demons to be extinct, yet the demons appeared to be living with the giants. Thus, the reign of King Allant XII became a time of military expedition into this unwelcoming land. Most raids were unsuccessful, save one in which the soul arts were stolen. Only the king and his brother returned from this raid, and indeed from the land of the giants. The soldiers of the Northern Crusade were left behind, unable to return. The silent path has been lost. Beyond the king's gift stand the villages of the giants. Above, the pillaged nexus hovers ominously, casting a purple glow upon mud huts and hot sulphur springs. It was here that King Allant XII staged his assault, forcing the giants to call down the nexus. The secrets of the soul arts lay within. For their part, the giants did not defend the nexus, and only fought back when threatened. This village is watched over by the last herdmaster, and Ekos, the gathering of souls that it can summon. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the herdmaster does not talk to those who venture into the land of the giants, and it will also refrain from attacking. One is left wondering if it's worth fighting, or if it's better to leave the land in peace. Perhaps their secrets are only a danger to mankind, and better left alone. Upon the silent path, the player had to avoid the cold and the slow decrease of health that it brought. In the silent village, the opposite is true. Heat is the true threat. Fog obscures geysers of boiling water that can scald the player if they do not sense them nearby. To overcome the last herdmaster, one must avoid Ekos or take them out first, all while strafing away from the environmental threats. The Northern Limit by Eugenia Lysa. Once a sacred place of pilgrimage, the land of the giants has been reduced to ruin. Most giants died to ballista fire, but some are dead to magical means. At the time that they declared war, mankind had a burgeoning interest in magic, and believed the giants' soul arts could take them to greater heights. At the heart of the soul arts study was the Necto Shrine, where maidens solemnly speak to the Old One. At the center of the shrine is the candle pot, where wax drips down upon the eyes of a young maiden-to-be. In this way, she denies the visual world and strengthens the inner eye that sees all. The raid upon the giants was led by Kenneth, nephew of Lord Riddell. He took over their palace and, immersed in the forbidden soul arts, became the archdemon of the Old One. In keeping with such a role, the giants were wiped out. Mankind's victory shall be brief, for they will be the next to face the new archdemon's wrath. The Lost City by Christian Reifix Reis. The sixth archstone of demon souls is broken, so it stands to reason that it cannot be used for teleportation to the northern limit. Instead, I like to imagine the player descending from the floating Nexus Temple and being forced to wander through an icy wasteland in search of their true destination. It was always rumored that this hub-world floated over ground. We see such a sight in the monumental cutscene, and the Maiden in Black is at one point referred to as a witch in the sky. Furthermore, it's likely that the Nexus actually does float above the northern limit. After all, recovered text from the official Demon Souls website reveals that Allant discovered a giant linchpin temple in a hinterland of icy mountains. Here, in Christian's world, the player sets off in search of a lost city inspired by the cut content, but they must first traverse a vast icy wasteland. Snow falls silently. The only details marking the land are the corpses of Boleadorian soldiers torn to shreds by an enormous foe. Follow the carnage to arrive at a towering gateway where a battle between men and demons appears to have taken place. It is here that you will face your first boss, a headless snow demon, the first of 3 that you must defeat. The level design tightens as you progress onwards. A green light shines from a cavern in the distance. The lost city awaits. The 3 headless snow demons each protect a region of the northern limit. Their forms differ slightly, but each encounter with them is more difficult than the last. Look closely and you might spy hints of a tribal tattoo etched upon their skin, a hint that these demons were born from the native giants. When the colorless fog first swept through the land of the giants, its 3 leaders decided to sacrifice themselves. The first did so to appease the gods. The second hoped to avoid pain and suffering, and the third feared that he would become a demon if left alive. All 3 died in vain. Decapitated and disemboweled, demons manifested within the powerful giants, making a mockery of their sacrifice. This first scourge was brought about by the Monumentals, who once lived in peace with these giants of the northern limit. It was here that they discovered an ancient Old One, a force of nature once responsible for the creation of life, now kept in peaceful slumber by its maiden in white. The Monumentals offered to help protect this primeval creature, and the maiden in white accepted, sensing that the Monumentals were honest in their offer. Over time, however, they did more than just protect the creature, they studied it. From their research came the soul arts, and a lust for the power that lay beyond human comprehension. The ancient Old One suffered in the pursuit of this power. Discovering the betrayal all too late, the maiden in white roused the ancient Old One. With its dying breath, it awakened another of its kind, and this vengeful Old One began the first scourge, driven by the death cry of its kin. The player arrives to see the ancient Old One strung upside down, long since dead at the hands of the Monumentals. Beneath it stands the maiden in white, who wishes to bring about the end of the world. After the first scourge was ended, King Allant came here seeking power. Knowing full well that the king would trigger a second scourge, the maiden in white taught him everything she knew. The Last Scream by Mark Mestre. In this piece, the Boleadorian army makes its final stand. They are fighting the latest monstrosity from the northern limit, where the colorless grey fog has heralded an endless wave of demons. Before it was a demon, this creature was simply a hungry yeti living in the mountains. Now, its head has disappeared completely, and its tongue has extended to an extreme length. The demon's souls have made it a match for many men. Valgaror by Istrandar. When the first scourge appeared, the northern limit was quickly overrun. Demons decimated the scattered tribes. United by a common enemy, the tribes decided to band together and fight as one. After a hasty deliberation, they chose the monstrous Valgaror as their leader. The blood of the giants coursed through Valgaror's veins. For years he had lived chained like a beast, but now he and his brothers led the fight against the demons, slaughtering many of their number. Alas, the demons could not be stopped, and the tribe's warriors were slain. As the tribes fled before the demon horde, Valgaror fought to buy them time, and eventually fell to a gigantic demon blade. Years passed, and the demon threat was eventually contained by the Monumentals. However, man's memory of history is short, and before long he repeated his mistakes. When the second scourge swept through the land, ruin once again fell upon the northern limit. Desperate, a few lost souls once more set out to save what remained of the tribes. With dark magic, their cultists brought Valgaror back to life. They had hoped that the giant beast would fight the demons again, but death had not been kind to his mind, so he arose filled with rage and madness. He slaughtered those who had brought him back, and refused to once again give his life for others. When the player fights Valgaror in-game, they find him tending to the skulls of his brothers. Despite his sacrifice, none had survived. He will refuse to fight the player unless one of the skulls is broken. If this happens, then the fight begins. Valgaror tears the sword from his chest and swings it wildly by the blade, with no regard for his own well-being. At low health, he will fall to the ground and crawl towards the skull he was holding when the fight began. Soon, he will be reunited with his brothers in death. Imagining Bloodborne 2. When we started playing Bloodborne in 2015, we thought we had a grip on what it was. Just a stereotypical Victorian-era horror story, right? Infected townsfolk, trenchcoats, werewolves, night of the hunt, got it. But, all of a sudden, you might spy aliens in the woods, or be picked up and crushed by an invisible force. That's when you realize the core of Bloodborne isn't the werewolves or Gothic architecture, it's the fear of the unknown. The realization that mankind is swept up in tides created by greater beings, and that the truth is so terrifying it would destroy us if only we had the insight to understand. In the early 20th century, H.P. Lovecraft pioneered this brand of cosmic horror, writing stories that reflected the human desire to seek knowledge and the inability of the human mind to comprehend terrible truths. Thus, I now feel that Bloodborne could be set anywhere, as long as its unique brand of horror remained intact. This chapter is called Imagining Bloodborne 2, and in the pages to come, artists set out to grant us eyes. What might a sequel to Bloodborne look like? Should we return to the dim streets of Yharnam, or venture somewhere else entirely? Will we fight our way through the ending with the waking world, or discover what it means to ascend? What trick weapons might we wield? Which nightmares might we explore? And what insights might we divine therein? No restrictions were imposed for this competition. Artists could depict locations, enemies, bosses, weapons, and characters to their heart's content. While many decided to produce original characters and locations, a common source of inspiration was the Chalice Dungeons and the Vile Bloods. In the end, though, the most popular theme was the ocean. A bottomless curse, a bottomless sea, source of all greatness, all things that be. Ailing Loran by Thomas Chamberlain Keane. Injured, you wander the infinite desert. Regardless of the direction you travel, you will run into a cloaked figure pulling a makeshift pram. As you approach, the familiar character slowly turns around and withdraws an enormous scythe. She is nimble, hard-hitting, and even uses eldritch attacks if you put up a fight. You cannot defeat her. You awaken in the hunter's reverie, a pleasant daydream that reminds the player of home. Before you stands the doll. She has removed her hood, revealing a cracked facade. While powerful, she is falling apart and needs your help. You are a warrior, no? Then I am in luck. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after my child. Yet I must venture out, for reasons I cannot explain. Good warrior, will you go in my stead? What is it you desire in return? You make an accord with this peculiar doll, helping her in exchange for learning the lost art of blood healing, which you intend to bring back to your village. To this end, she hands you a tarnished cannula, and tells you of ailing Loran. Long ago, the land of Loran was in great peril. Its climate was changing, and soon the only waters to be found were the mirages on the horizon. The queen was lost, until an accord was offered by the Tumerian priest, a ritual that, when complete, could deliver her poor Loranites from torment. Of course she accepted. She knew not the horror she was inflicting upon the world, a beastly curse of defilement and death. Ever since our arrival, I've felt passing strange. In my dreams I see sands shifting somewhere below, revealing a ruined country. Above it all I see a ring of blood. These things I must find, though I know not why. Return to Loran, good warrior. I will guide you. You enter the exposed ruins of Loran. Languishing in the sun are Ixodyda, giant ticks that have grown fat on the blood of a great one. Inside the old, shadowy structures lurk Loran beasts, insectoid creatures with claws, pincers, and fangs. A nearby chest yields the tendon saber. In the deepest region of the old city, you find the altar of the lost ocean. Here the desiccated bodies of ancient Loranites lie bent in prayer before the altar. To the side, a female figure in royal attire has fallen, revealing terrible wounds upon her abdomen. The Great One, Fauna, perches atop the altar, holding some bloodied remains wrapped in swaddling cloth. Long ago, it offered its blood to sustain the ailing people of Loran. In return, it required a queen, a mother to bear its child. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, the child did not survive. Fauna mourns quietly until you step too close, sending the Great One into a frenzy. As it thrashes about, the altar breaks apart and crumbles into the abyssal water. You fall with it, plunging into the Great One's nightmare. Unlike other nightmare realms, this one literally takes place within the psyche of Fauna, and you struggle to escape its consciousness. Underneath a blood-red eclipse, the epic fight with the Great One begins. Slay the nightmare, and free Laran. If you have accrued enough insight by the end of the game, you will see Fauna hanging above Laran's central sun altar. The doll waves gently, walking her pram to the top of the altar. Fauna descends. As it reaches out to touch the pram, the air seems to shiver as they all disappear from sight. The city is at peace. In the end, every Great One loses its child, and then yearns for a surrogate. The Descendants by Yongzart. You awaken in a fine haze, surrounded by dead scientists and doctors. What happened here? You recall a past life filled with hunters, scholars, and beasts, but cannot remember which side you were on. Your garb is familiar, but something is amiss. Barnacles encrust your right arm, while your left is bandaged with beastly hairs protruding. You feel power surging from both sides, but the nature of this power is drastically different, as if it's of two worlds, one above ground and one deep below the ocean. By your side is a strange weapon, a khopesh, thrust through an ornate axe head, combining the two. You recognize this as a trick weapon, and your hunter instincts come flooding back. It's just as well, for a creature has stalked into the room, and a boss battle with the descendant of a Great One has begun. The creature assaults you with beastly swipes, but also with celestial abilities, such as a cosmic portal that summons small meteors. Its most dangerous attack combines the two, extending its tail's physical length with ghostly apparitions. You narrowly escape with your life, and come away with a grudging respect for your own celestial and beastly strength. When held by the blade, your beastly blood feeds the axe, exploding it into a beast mode that self-inflicts damage with every swing. Alternatively, when socketed with celestial gems, the weapon can be wielded as a was scepter, capable of shooting arcane missiles at opponents. So, are you a beast, or something more? The Child of Blood by Eugenia Lysa. Long ago, Queen Annalise sat in Canehurst Castle and accepted blood dreg offerings so that she might bear her child of blood. 3 things make this child special. First, thanks to its mother's blood, it cannot die. Second, since hunters gathered those blood dreg offerings, the child has an inborn hunter instinct. Lastly, this child of blood is you, the player of the game. You awaken in a familiar hunter's dream. The gates are locked, but the garden leads to a large observatory where you meet the maiden of this hub. Her name is Elise, a vampire and astronomer who, despite her youthful looks, is quite an old gal. Once I was a member of the Queen's Guild Scholars, but that was a long time ago. At first, Elise is reserved and taciturn, but as you progress, she opens up, even becoming sarcastic. Talking to her reveals that she has a purpose in the dream, to perform research as you travel in the waking world. The importance of the moon is exaggerated, don't you think? There are so many different stars and planets out there, just waiting to be examined. Your adventure begins in the Torment Gardens, a settlement founded by exiled Vilebloods. Here, twisted by corrupted blood, these hedonistic vampires drown in sin, caging and torturing their victims as they drain their vitality. Among their favorite victims are the twins, young dancers drained of blood and turned into dolls for the exiles' amusement. Free them from their captors, and they will pass you a key that unlocks a door to the spiritual center, which precipitates your encounter with Runesmith Carol. An enormous Ouija board lies before you, held in place by a series of large metallic hands. Inscribed upon the plates are Carol runes, those fateful symbols that represent the utterings of the Great Ones. You step onto the plate, and the encounter begins. Runesmith Carol himself descends from the heavens like a ghost from the outer realms. As he approaches, the plates below you begin to shift and spin. When the picker settles on a rune, its power infuses Carol, imparting certain attributes upon his form. For example, if you chance upon the Beast's Embrace rune, then the boss will take on a beastly form, preferring to strike you in melee. On the other hand, you may face the effects of the Milkweed rune, and defend against celestial ranged attacks. As the fight continues, runes continue to be chosen and buff the boss, making each new attempt unique, and unpredictable. Overcome this challenge, and the Ailing rune in the center will be chosen, taking you to the next stage of your journey, Loran. Here we meet Queen Nazilu, whose thirst for blood started a craze that brought her civilization to ruin. Fight her, and in her second phase you will unleash a blood-starved beast. Later on, you arrive at the nightmare of Captain Gene Widmond and stow away on his ship. Here, the truth of your birth is finally revealed. As a child of blood, you immediately become a target for Queen Annalisa's vile blood enemies. The Queen sailed away with the captain, who promised to protect her and hide the child. You escaped, but the ship was taken, cursed to forever roam the cosmic ocean. Back at the hunter's dream, and in full thrall of your birthright, you are baptized in blood. This triggers a nightmare in which you face off against your own doppelganger. Here, at the end, you have a choice. Accept the power of your vile blood, and rule over the exiles, or defeat your nightmare and master your own self. Wailing Gate by Rooks and Isnir. I'm convinced that every player of modern From Software titles has had that double door opening animation burnt into their memory. It's a slow animation that usually inspires a yawn, but if one was to open the Wailing Gate, they might respond with a shriek instead. Two mighty arms erupt from the gate and can crush the inattentive player. Phase 1 has begun. This first phase immediately sets out to fill the player with another false sense of security, as the gate does not appear to be able to move. The most it attempts is to open its eyes and inflict the player with frenzy. After a certain amount of damage, however, the final safety blanket is ripped away, and the boss reveals its true form. A long, fleshy, worm-like body extends into the arena, allowing the gate to grab any player that has not immediately turned tail. In this final phase, players must avoid that frenzy eye beam and tread ever backwards as the Wailing Gate lurches after them. Once defeated, the bloody tunnel previously occupied by the Wailing Gate can be traversed. It leads to the Beast of Seroch, a mysterious creature that does not attack the player. Carol's Fate by Istrandar. As Carol composed her name with the runes of the Great Ones, she discovered within herself a thirst for knowledge, a desperate need to answer the call of the formless beings that had begun to speak within her head. So, with the blessing of Master Willem, she left Bergenworth and soon found herself deep within the ruins of Loran. Creeping through the silent labyrinth, she spied an old Tumerian ringing a strange bell. Envying how he seemed to speak to a heavenly presence, she fell upon the Tumerian, ripping the bell from his grasp and taking it for her own. Back in her workshop, Carol worked tirelessly to understand the bell, believing it carried a way for her to communicate with the Great Ones. As she worked, crows and owls gathered around, listening intently, seeming to apprehend something she could not. As the days passed, they changed, growing larger and more intelligent. Soon, insight struck her, resonating throughout her whole body. Her body, that was what held her back. Through terrible use of vermin, blood, and runes, Carol found a way to transcend into lucid beasthood. She could finally hear the Great Ones, and by engraving runes upon the bells, communicate with them. However, the process is dangerous and inconsistent. Many birds in her workshop have become hideous abominations, thirsting for blood, with Carol the largest and most dangerous of them all. Now that her beastly instincts have arisen, she grows impatient and reckless. No one knows what she might try next. Oceanborn by Toby Treblejar. Their homeland smote by the gods, and lost beneath the waves of the Ashen Sea, the pilgrims built themselves a great ark, a refuge for all the good and brave folk, their hearts full of love for the oceans and the dreams that lay within. The name of their vessel was Behemoth, and after many long moons of sailing through tempest and woe, they reached peaceful shores, and were hitheron called the coast folk. Rarely do they speak of the Evanescence. Rarer still is speech about the lost ship, the one whose name was forgotten, the ship that held the others, who refused the Piper's bargain. Fear these ocean-born, for they now know the Piper and the one he serves. It has been many moons since the Ashen Sea retreated. Barren be the pits and chasms of its vanished waters, lost far beneath the settlements of the coast folk. Do you hear it, wanderer? Do you hear the music of the ocean-born that sounds so longingly from the deep? If you want to follow its call, then steel yourself. The ocean is more ancient than the mountains, and things crawl and slither down in the inky blackness that no man has ever laid eyes upon. Deep within the sepulchre traipses the Nukilevi, a caustic creature filled with bitter anguish. Long ago it lost a battle with the mother of the sea and has been confined here ever since. It lacks the courage to confront her again, so settles for echoing the piper's song, reverberating its tune throughout the deep. A petty revenge, but a nasty one to be sure. Always face the music, deep fisher. Unless you heed a siren, of course. In that case flee while her song is faintly heard. Her form is ghastly, but her voice is enchanting, and it will draw you near. Curb your wild curiosity. Wax wool in your ears, if you must. If you come across a pig shepherdess, mind your business. Her care is solely for her grotesquely bloated flock, and she walks the coral meadows in peace. However, if you so much as touch her children, be fast, for so too shall be her wrath. You've met the Kelpmen, I take it. They're silent, harmless folk. Occasionally one of them comes up to the settlements to trade. I've heard they have huge cities down there somewhere. Beyond it all lies the third ridge. The rock there steeps sharply, and even the most accomplished deep fishers don't venture far into that sepulchral blackness, for beyond lies the home of the Old Ones and their servants. There the music sounds the sweetest. The piper awaits. Will you make the leap? Carmela's Greenhouse by Wes Fraser. In the early days of Yharnam, the healing church cultivated grass herbs to heal the sick. The greenhouses were havens for such a craft, used to grow and mix the genomes of these unique herbs. So popular were they, church missionaries would often settle in foreign lands, constructing greenhouses in their ghettos in a show of sovereign hospitality. Everything changed, however, following the discovery of the healing blood. While at first the blood was mixed with the grass to great pharmaceutical effect, it soon became clear that nothing could compare to the effect of pure, ministrated blood, and the greenhouses were decommissioned. Before long, the scourge of beasts overcame Yharnam, and the healing church began to look for a way to transcend their beastly idiocy. Sister Carmela recalled the old greenhouses and envisioned an age of open waters, where mankind could transcend through flora, not fauna. Thus, the greenhouses were opened, and research recommenced. By using lumen wood as a medium to attract phantasms in a human host, it was possible to bridge the gap between layers of a nightmare. The dandelion messages are a product of such research, and can be used to warp between greenhouses and access deeper nightmares. Become a lumen wood that peers towards the sky and guide us to further discoveries. Michael, Prince of Cainhurst, by Augusto Costa. Tread no further. I am Michael, son of Queen Evelyn and Prince of Cainhurst. You shall not pass. Michael wears sturdy plate armor, trimmed with a rich drapery of silk. Such heavy-set attire marks a specific point in Cainhurst's history, a time before Vilebloods, before the forbidden blood was stolen for the nobles of Cainhurst Castle. To a foreigner, it must sound dramatic. A prince guarding a bridge. Well, consider this. If one strikes me down, then the full wrath of Cainhurst will fall upon my killer. Is that dramatic enough for you? After standing alone for so long, Michael converses eagerly. His pride keeps him here, despite receiving word of Cainhurst's decline. You are not the first to speak to me of such things. Beasts on the street, the nobility drinking blood, lies, blasphemy. In fact, mere months ago I allowed a traveller through, by request of my aunt Annalise. According to her, he was carrying a great treasure, something that will make our reign eternal. You eventually force your way past, leaving him bloody on the bridge. Beyond you see countless displays of cruelty, chief among them that Evelyn has been ruthlessly displaced by her sister, who partakes of blood-dreg offerings, so that she may one day bear a child of blood, the next Vileblood heir. Mother, I have failed you. Can Kur by Deadly Demon. The Vale of Ioth lies barren, its surface blasted by lightning. Once it was the hub of a powerful empire that changed the nature of existence. Now, any life growing there is of a sallow and twisted sort. Through rites and rituals, they called an ancient menace down from the great dark between the stars. Across the eons, it stretched a sinuous tentacle and made the first contact with humanity. To the covetous people of Eoth, it whispered dark and unspeakable things, ways in which a life could be distilled into essential salts and used to revive the dead or fortify the living. Their experiments were terrible, but legend warped reality into grand tales of gods and heroes, of cities paved with gold and precious stone. Is it any wonder, then, that the occasional foreign explorer will venture here in search of unclaimed treasure? You find Kankur deep within the bowels of the earth, a colossal beast lodged within a fissure. He appears still, statuesque, surrounded by a ring of candles and the bones of former offerings. Only when you step beyond the candle ring does he finally move, reaching out with fleshy growths, batting at you with heavy swipes. After a certain amount of damage, Kankur becomes enraged and tears through the opening, flaying himself to unveil wings of electrified viscera. The threshold must be protected, at all costs. The Nightmare Settlement by Carl Hassler. Weary beyond belief, you wander the ruined streets of Yharnam. Something has changed. No longer is this a city for men overrun by beasts. Rather, it's a city for beasts threatened by man. In their old age, many beasts have attained insight, and their rule over Yharnam has even enticed pilgrimage. Suddenly, a colossal clawed hand closes around your waist. The massive beast opens its jaws wide, releasing a horrible shriek as you are crushed in its grip. Suddenly, its head is severed, as if by an invisible blade. An unseen hunter has put an end to this monster's life. Exhausted, you pass out. You awaken on the shore of the Nightmare Settlement, a small colony for lost souls. Here, nestled deep in a nightmare, you can rest, use the workshop, and talk to other refugees. Among them is Gerard, another hunter from the looks of it, and Carol, who founded this settlement. A former scholar of Bergenworth turned guide for dreaming travelers, Carol is renowned for her uncanny ability to communicate with the Great Ones. Not since the Tumerian Age has a nightmare been turned into a home. Here, thanks to Carol, even the amygdala keep their hands to themselves. The Mission by Sam Moonskinned Lamont. Such was the wonder of blood ministration that we were compelled to bring that knowledge to foreign shores. Our fleet was a revelation, and we were its missionaries. How blind we were. Now we can see, looking upon the stain of warping death we leave in our wake, it is not a miracle we bring, but unstoppable ruin. Gods help us. Our mission was forever changed when the first chorus whale was hauled aboard. Curiously, we administered the old blood, and to our delight, the creature gave up its secrets in flesh and song. Its bounty was so miraculous that we turned every single ship towards a new goal: hunt more whales. Our formation is led by the Fimble Winter, the North Star of the fleet. Its great lighthouse shines eternal, piercing rain and fog to light the way. Thus the job of lamplighter is important and prestigious, for if things go dark, the entire fleet is lost. Shortly after switching to whale oil in the lighthouse, the blinding sickness struck. It first afflicted those responsible for lighting the lamps, but it hardly distracted them from their duties. Rather, they took to their tasks with renewed vigor, staring straight into the light, as if willing it to grow brighter. If you come across one, run. To them, you are just another beacon that has not yet been lit. Our third ship is called the Brilliant Communion. It's the tallest vessel in our fleet, with glittering towers reserved for Father Reuben and his clergy. As a high-ranking representative of the church, it was Reuben who demanded we change course. He craves the eldritch truth, and saw the chorus whales as a mean to that end. You haven't lived until you've tasted the flesh of a chorus whale. It sharpens the senses, heals the body, and broadens the mind. Soon enough, those in power kept it all to themselves, leaving only the oil to be freely distributed across the fleet. Who knows how much blubber Father Reuben has consumed? He must be a veritable colossus by now. Roaming the decks are his flensing witches, former nuns charged with removing the whale's flesh. Their shears are massive and crude, but they wield them with great dexterity, ready to pare the flesh from any who are unlucky enough to cross their path. If they kill you, your skin will be added to their cloak, bolstering their power and skill in the eldritch arts. If you manage to kill a witch, be advised that their tools are poorly constructed. Eventually, such weapons will break, forcing you to use each blade as a makeshift sword instead. Our fourth and final ship is the Cornucopia, a massive trawling vessel built to feed the entire fleet. However, after the discovery of the first chorus whale, the ship was quickly repurposed and refitted with whaling tools. As a result, many starved, and countless more were lost after consuming the whale's irresistible ambergris. Later, we used the ambergris to form wax phonographs. Upon the whale's own substance, we recorded their death songs. Killing a whale is no mean feat. When attacked, its blood flows around it, restricting your movement. Manage to carve it open, and intestines will erupt, thrashing violently about. If you catch a glimpse of an eye within, beware, for they are capable of blasting foes with arcane beams. Blind them if you wish to continue your assault. Nothing could have prepared us for what was inside each cavernous carcass. Beneath the skin, hundreds, thousands, millions of eyes. Eyes that watch you as you are drawn deeper within. Eyes that coalesce into a sea of stars and galaxies until you see it, the city underneath, a non-Euclidean space where the true forms of the chorus whales glide overhead with an alien grace. The spire of the deep sea is there, and atop it the heralds. Kill them, wanderer, and bring this mission to an end. Deepford by Holdsworth Hands. You awaken in the hunter's dream to find the place empty and abandoned. The doll is nowhere to be found, but she has left a note by the edge of the dream. Search for memories in the depths of the ocean. You equip the underwater hunter equipment, step into the diving bell, and descend. Below, you find Dean, the deep diver. He hands you a trick weapon called Henry's Lost Anchor, and explains that during the hunters' insurrection, the deep sea, and anything found within, was all they had. The fear of the great ones above was so great, and the rush to escape them so intense, that their first suits were poorly designed, and all early expeditions failed. Hunters were not prepared to face the depths of the ocean, and their suits were deemed mere moving coffins. Siege Gorman was the first hunter to design diving armor capable of enduring higher pressures. His expedition traveled so deep and so far that no one ever saw them again. What kind of creature could stand this pressure? What horrors lie chained in the deepest depths? Seaborn by Zachary Gord Perrett. A short cutscene plays. A ship is pulled into a whirling vortex, and the player washes up on a beach. An NPC named Herman is seated on the shore. Aye, let me guess. Your ship got snatched up by a foul storm, pulled down to the darkest depths. In that case, I'm afraid your crew went down with the ship. You should consider it a mercy, really. Something about this place. Well, you can't sleep. Not ever. So I sit here very, very quietly, in a sort of sleepless dream. As for me Confederates, well, you'll see. Here, take me hook safe and me pistol. You'll be needing them more than I. Talk to Herman after killing an enemy. It's a fun piece of kit, that hook safe, ain't it? But there's the rub, you see. Before long, you'll find yourself toying with prey, unable to finish the job. But it's your problem now. It's a bloody relief to be rid of it, if I'm honest. Show Herman the mark of a moonless child. Ah, so you've seen it too, have you? And lived to tell the tale? I thought you might. We hunters see things differently. I failed them. Every single one. I was their hunter, but I couldn't bear to hunt her, so I watched as she... Take me advice, laddie. Defy your own nature. Kill without passion. That's the only way we'll be rid of this mess. Give Herman a crewmate's trinket. I see you found me Confederates. I hope you gave 'em hell. It's lonely on this here beach. Least they could have done is visit. Prepare to be Hunted by Janine Maganito. When the executioners descended upon Canehurst, unbeknownst to them, ships had set sail in the night, carrying their corrupted blood to distant shores. Canehurst would rise again. The people of Aram Maris revere the water, and consider everything from it to be a blessing. So when it delivered the Vilebloods to their shores, they were overjoyed. They had heard a story about these legendary folk. Once a sailor met a Vileblood named Jari, who fell in love with him, offering him her delightful blood. Unsatisfied, he took her eyes to forge mighty weapons and encased her in stone, where she bled forevermore. Unfortunately, a second ship sailing towards Aram Maris was besieged by pirates, and Vilebloods were flung overboard. Their blood mingled with all the creatures of the sea, contaminating life. Now the corruption has spread to the village. Pirates, merchants, blacksmiths, and NPCs have mutated, and all thirst for your vile blood. Prepare to be hunted. One Aeronaut by Ricardo Emig. They call it the One Aeronaut. Yes, indeed. The wondrous device that grants one eyes. There, at the graveyard of our achievements, where now prayers are heard nevermore, will the line between the dreams blur, and when the red tide comes, the waters rise, and all will be taken by the endmost night. Those who walk the lucid lane, trying to wake themselves by raising Cain, the bourgeoisie, immaculate. And upon the crown of creation, lonely stands a galvanist, trying to reanimate a wilting flower's myth. Curious, God from the machine. And the pilgrims who finally found the way, for in their call beyond, the fifth wall will break, the panopticon of the deep sea. Like ants, we dug deep. Like ants, we built high. And like ants, will be squashed by the sea and the sky. Ah, what have we created? But worry not, for it will always end how it had begun. Behold, the rising sun. City of Veildenam by Titanilla Pietzvor. I was 15 years old when the first tide came. It was the day of the grand masquerade, where nobility put on airs, perfume, and fancy dress. For one blissful day, the civil war between Vilebloods and the church was forgotten, as both sides donned masks and spoke without fear, freed by the veils they wore. Servants walked among masters, men fenced for the sport, and pretty women waited their turn to be blessed by the church. Everyone was equal, and all were equally swept beneath the red tide when it arose. Veildenam is an ancient city, built upon the surface of the sea by the Forgotten Ones. You may know them by a different name, Tumerian. When the first tide came, they rose with it, emerging from the city's secret catacombs to wreak further havoc among those who yet lived. But that's not the worst of it. The red tide carried a plague, and those who caught it were changed beyond belief. Beware, the humming lady treads beyond. Her feet move silently, but make no mistake, she wants to be heard. She wants to be seen. If you hear her song, flee. She was there at the grand masquerade. So was he, disguised as a noble, the Tumerian bastard. He arrived early to the festivities, hunting for sacrifices, so was corrupted, like all the rest. Serves him right, I say. May he rot beside Brysenton himself. Who is Brysenton? No one knows for sure. A scientist, a devil. His child roams the lower streets, crying out for father. Until they are reunited, no iron, nor fire, nor death of any kind will touch him. Eldritch Gunslinger Grimwald by Dmitry Radoshinki. Armed to the teeth, the last gunslinger stalks the nightmare. Now, the nightmare stalks back. Eldritch Gunslinger Grimwald was once part of the Gunslinger Coven, a group of hunters renowned for their beast hunting. As their Grand Master, he has inherited Osrith and Eckhart, a large caliber revolver, and a sword that shares its quicksilver rounds. His attire is reinforced with sanctified silver, worn threadbare by the winds of countless adventures. Most curious of all his items is De Vermis Mysterious, a folio containing the hellish secrets learned by early men. We find Grimwald lost within the unspeakable void, a nightmare realm that harbors hostile spirits. These entities are kept at bay thanks to the pomander hanging from Grinwald's waist, which releases the acrid scent of mistletoe and willow. Soon this protection will expire, so Grinwald tasks you with replenishing his store of herbs. Refuse, and you shall face his possessed self the next time you meet. Accept, and you may yet find a way through the dreamlands. Salvin Castle by Benjamin Reinsch. The West has seen many royal houses rise and fall over the centuries, but one name has endured since the chronicling of history itself: Salvin. Permanently shrouded in storm, only an unlucky few will catch a glimpse of their ever-expanding castle. Word from afar is that nobles there possess the means of blood healing. Such a rumor has brought many pilgrims to their gates. Yet all who enter have gone missing, and it is the nobles who are to blame. For among the filthy, unworthy scum of mankind, some are born free of vermin. These rare specimens can be safely infused with the blood of a great one, and are harvested to fuel a terrible ritual. In truth, Lord Salvin has allied with a great one, and desperately seeks a way to manifest its being in our reality. The gifts of the evil god have turned him into an entity far beyond mortal comprehension. Yet when the time comes, even he will accept his role as its loyal servant, and the Great One will plunge our universe into unfathomable chaos and despair. The Hinterlands by Jonathan Gregory Bick. The player begins a journey through the outskirts of the Hinterlands, a murky wetland brimming with decay and rot. Once the Hinterlands were home to the Crows, a wise and perceptive clan renowned for wielding weapons forged from siderite. They coveted this shining metal, and would go to great lengths to obtain it, stashing it in their homes for safekeeping. It was said to have fallen from the sky, and the Crows worshipped anything that originated from such a heavenly realm. One day, a herald arrived in their primitive town, preaching of blood healing, an exceptional medicine developed in a nearby city called Yharnam. The Crows had no need of such a thing, and the herald soon left. Not long after his visit, the land softened, crops started to wilt, and crows fell, afflicted by a strange illness that had them coughing blood and ash. Suspecting a ploy to empty their town so it could be pillaged of siderite, the remaining tribesfolk departed for Yharnam nevertheless, forced from the place they once called home. Their sick required healing, but a crow never forgets a face, and the healing church will rue their murder. The Ruined Captain by Mark Mester. After the first group of scholars left Byrgenwerth, Master Willem was certain that only the most loyal students remained. However, when some of the scholars began to transform into eye-covered beasts, he realized the truth. Lawrence's betrayal was only the beginning. The second group of scholars to leave were disillusioned by the quest for insight. Unlike Willem, they believed that the human mind would never be able to tolerate the eldritch truth, and so abandoned seeking it entirely. Ignorance is bliss, or so they say. Thanks to the old blood, the city of Yharnam had grown exponentially. Yes, it had succumbed to a plague of beasts, but that was surely only because they used too much blood. By limiting its consumption, this second group believed they could safely start a new world. So, stealing a large supply of the old blood from Byrgenwerth, they sailed off across the ocean. After weeks of sailing, they saw it, an island. Despite its monstrous appearance, it was perfectly habitable, and the crew made camp. Their huts were crude, and they lacked experience, but the old blood bolstered their efforts, and they made good progress. That is, until the pirates arrived. Led by Captain Edward Vane, the pirates pillaged the scholars' commune and ventured deeper into the jungle, seeking ancient treasure. They found gold in the ruins of an ancient civilization, along with sculptures of tentacled creatures devoured by nature. This deeply unsettled the scholars. Too late they realized they were but pawns in a Great One's game, and Edward was its newest servant. Discovering the power of the old blood, Captain Edward expands the commune, luring travelers to the island's shores with rumors of its miraculous healing blood. They come in droves, following the promise of life, only to be met with death. At night, tribesfolk kidnap visitors, feeding them to the island. It is sentient, and it hungers. The Great One has led scholars astray, ruined a captain, and secured a constant supply of food for itself. Who knows what it will try next? Conflicting Covenants by Ab Wink and Rain Love. In the childhood's beginning, ending of Bloodborne, the player becomes an infant Great One, fated to guide humanity into its next stage of evolution. Ab and Rain's story proposes that they go on to become the Great Hunter. With the Great Hunter on our side, we are no longer defenseless against the Great Ones, but mankind has always been its own worst nightmare. Realizing a new world order was at hand, the Healing Church quickly pivoted, curbing blood ministration and switching to worship of the Great Hunter. Now known as the Hunter Church, it aims to lead Yharnam into a new age of peace and prosperity. However, not all are convinced. Rejecting this renewed focus on humanity, the Celestial Congregation rose from the ashes of the choir, using newfound phantasms to transform. With pale skin, tentacles, and arcane tools, they aim to ascend beyond what is humanly possible. In hostile opposition to the congregation, the University of Alanold seeks to place humanity at the top of the food chain by annihilating the Great Ones and their kin. With advanced weaponry inspired by the flame sprayers, rifles, firebombs, and bolt munitions of old, they stage constant assaults to test their technology. Like the university, the hematologists broke away from the church to become a scientific organization. They have returned to the older ways of medicine, utilizing scalpels, curved amputation knives, syringes, and leeches. Yharnamites who have lost faith in the church can seek them for treatment, though it's worth bearing in mind that they fight with the same instruments they use to heal. Hunters of Royal Blood Maidens by Mobius. The city of Yharnam was famous for its blood ministration, then its beasts and its hunters. When it was heard that the beastly scourge had spread to nearby regions, many of Yharnam's hunters opted to leave. Their city was done for, after all. It was better, they figured, to fight a new fledgling outbreak and walk away with their lives. There had been rumors of one such outbreak beyond the Deadly Marsh, in the province of the Royal Church. The Royals were responsible for supplying Yharnam with blood maidens, young women groomed as vessels that could be drawn upon whenever the church needed blood. These women were incredibly valuable to the church and a focus of desire for the blood drunk. Thus, they were groomed in isolation, beyond a deadly marsh, far from Yharnam, for their own protection, of course. Soon enough, the plague of beasts worsened, and panic spread. The church needed to keep the chaos bridled, so they sacrificed their maidens in full view of all and blamed them for the outbreak. Not long after, the many-eyed monstrosities appeared. When they could not be contained, the church abandoned the Royal Church and wiped out all record of its existence. Upon the player's arrival at the Blood Maiden dormitory, they will be greeted by Hunter Varim. He is excited to see another hunter in this place and can be easily prompted to reveal more about the location. "It's strange to see an outsider here, and a hunter no less, but you are a welcome sight. I could use some help with all the vermin. This here was once the dormitory of the Blood Maidens, where the poor girls would retire after a ghastly day of work. Revered women they were, and a fine facade for the church. To make worthy maidens, they'd need to refine their blood, you see. Rituals, transfusions, they kept trying until they succeeded, or the maiden died. How did they know if they had succeeded? Well, they'd drag in outsiders, cut 'em up, burn 'em, then pump them full of maiden blood. See how nicely the wounds would heal." Blood Maiden NPCs and bosses can be found all throughout the dormitory. After defeating Blood Maiden Agnes, the player is transported to Nightmare's End, a realm of blood created from the Blood Maiden's shared trauma. Sitienstia lurks within, a great one whose evil goes well beyond the plague of beasts. She withholds the true secrets of the royal Blood Maidens. This fight at the end of the nightmare is a harrowing one. Indeed, when one experiences a nightmare, the moment before waking is always the worst. Meet the Judge, Ricardo Emig. I first learned of Ricardo Emig while judging the entries for the SEKIRO prosthetic art competition. His entry, The Hand of the Rising Sun, was a peerless choice for first place. Ricardo would go on to contribute art for each competition, placing 6th, then 1st again, until the 6th Archstone competition for Demon Souls, where he accepted my proposal to become a judge instead. We had started working together on other projects, and it didn't seem fair to other artists if I was to judge the competition entries of a friend. Ricardo has taught me a lot in our years of working together, and I invite you to learn more about him, as I have. What got you into art in the first place? Self-discovery. I grew up in Germany, and being an only child, I found myself a kindergarten friend that I looked up to as a big brother. Together we explored the world of 90s video games, and got stuck often, as most of them were in English, so we would go outdoors and continue the adventures in our heads, sometimes merging worlds, changing certain aspects, or coming up with new ones. He taught me the great joy that lies in the balance of consumption and creation. Taking in humanity's achievements and channeling the inspiration to your own ideas is like breathing in and out. My mum always wanted me to draw, and my dad always wanted me to play piano. If I'm completely honest, though, I mostly preferred just using my imagination. Wherever I went, some story always followed me around. It never got boring. It wasn't until way later, when I visited my best friend one day after college for a gaming session, that I had a sudden thought. For some reason I said, "Yo, Tuan, let's go draw a bit." And so it began. What does your work mean to you? Admittedly, I like to analyze my own art and reflect on how it came to be. Because if you really think about it, art is basically you taking something deep within yourself and projecting it back into the real world. I filled my entries with a lot of symbolism for the viewer to find. That was a conscious process, but the true hidden meaning is something deeper, something that I myself have to decipher. I imagine that somewhere in this unconscious decision-making lies that which drives one's own creativity, the true source of our ideation. Here's what I found. I studied electrical engineering, but by the time I graduated, my goals had shifted. Coincidentally, right after that, you announced your first art challenge for Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. In The Hand of the Rising Sun, I believed that I manifested my desire to escape the grounded world, looking to create my own sun, in which I could bask one day. Shortly after, we got the big news about Elden Ring, and what stuck with me was the theme of the open world. So, yearning for freedom myself, I created Urda, she who imposes fate. I think I tried to give face to that which shackles me, the challenge I must overcome to open up the world. Then, when representing Dark Souls' Age of Chaos, what I subconsciously tapped into was to scrutinize the rule of past generations. Because we are born into the world following the rules of those who came before us, we are thus conditioned to think in certain ways. So I believe I tried to question this by portraying the fallibility of the elders, our childhood's god figures. Lastly, in Bloodborne's One Ironaut, I came full circle, back to where I started, processing my experiences as an electrical engineer, twisting them into a fantasy beyond my reality. I basically embraced the dream world, where everything is possible if viewed through the right lens. But oh well, maybe I overthink, haha. You've submitted art for every competition, except the one for Demon Souls for which you were a judge. What was it like being on both sides of the competitions? It was a great honor to be able to contribute something to all 5 competitions. Whenever I entered the contest, I tried thinking like a judge, but being in a judge's shoes was a challenge in itself. At some point, I had to accept that finding a truly fair measure by which to judge art is plain impossible, and so I had an epiphany there. I find the competition not to be the goal, but the challenge itself. The difference is that if you view it as a competition, you're trying to get first place by presenting your best self and everything you've learned thus far. But if you view it as a challenge, you strive to surpass yourself by learning new things. In retrospect, maybe that's why I have been so keen on mixing things up, creating a precedent in every other challenge by adding music composition, then writing, then animation. The best thing about having been part of all 5 competitions for me was that I got to try something completely new every single time. As the artist behind the cover for Soul Arts, what does this piece represent to you? The process I just described was the setup for what would later become the book cover. Ascending in this race from the abyss, hundreds of sculptures climb each other to reach the top, so that the spotlight might fall upon their brush mark. Their heads show their individual traits, as that is where their creativity stems from, all derived from Mr. Miyazaki's mythology, all transformations of humanity that are attempting to achieve immortality, and immortal they at last become, as this document of art will perpetuate our common legacy for the afterworld. The light source is positioned to shroud their faces in darkness, for the artist's true identity will remain unknown, and as they paint their shadows, they give us a faint glance into their inner self, their dark soul, so easily forgotten in the mass. Such is the fate of the artist, after all. Focused only on the competition, they forget that there would be no top if they had no one to latch onto. But without even knowing, they create something even greater in silent cooperation. That is humanity. We may be but small, but we will die a colossus. Our collaborative work, The Painted World of Ariarik, is featured on the opening spread of Soul Arts. Would you share some thoughts on it? I like to think that it's heavily inspired by Disney World, which I visited with my dad when I was a kid. The little theme park maps were something to get lost in, and the great tree in Animal Kingdom was a sight to behold. But I have another anecdote I'd like to share. Back then, I was living with my mum, and every year at Christmas, there was the big question of how to decorate the tree. She enjoyed more delicate colors for a subtle decoration, but me, I was a savage. I just wanted to slap everything I could find on that tree, make it the most vibrant, over-the-top thing ever. Haha. I think this desire translated right into the painted world of Ariarik. What are your future plans? Well, to get a job at From Software, of course. Haha, no wait, don't put this as my answer. It needs to be more profound. Hold my Estus flask. I embarked on this journey to discover myself. All my entries are about achieving freedom, so I will do well not to bind myself to expectations. Whoever wants to find me will. The real question of life is whether we'll be able to find ourselves. I have told a story from the rise of the sun to the fall of the night, and I don't know what the dream holds, which now eclipses my mind, but I do not fear the dark, for I got sunshine in a bag. Meet the judge, John Devlin. John Devlin is an Irish artist, renowned for his extensive portfolio of From Software-inspired artworks. If you've watched any of my YouTube videos in the last few years, then there's a good chance that you've already seen some of his art on my video thumbnails. John's characters simply erupt onto the page, inviting the viewer to seek out the masterful line work at their focal points. It's been an absolute privilege to watch his work evolve over the years. When I set out to judge the art competitions that led to Soul Arts, it was John that I reached out to first. I needed help. Quantifying the value of art is an impossible task, but having a second opinion helped to broaden our subjective assessment of every entry. It was also a lot of fun. We flipped through and fawned over hundreds of pages of artwork about games that we love, an experience that you, the reader, now get to share. What got you into art in the first place? My earliest memories of drawing as a young kid involve lying on a living room floor with my cousin, drawing imaginary superheroes and seeing who had the best results. It was up to our sisters to pick a winner, and my cousin always won. I think that really started my drive to get better. Your art has such a distinct style. How would you define it? I would define my style as a decent-looking mess. Do you think having a style is important for aspiring artists? Long opinions aside, I think it's very important to have a style in your work. But to add to this answer, I think it's also important you don't just force a style on yourself. Just do artwork, enjoy the journey, and a natural style will develop that will be all you. What advice would you give to an artist who is just starting out? So much to say, and the advice would differ depending on the field and type of person. But good general advice is to make good habits as early as possible. For example, having a drive to draw every day. Make the time. It's hard work, but it does pay off, and the more time you put into it, the more solid the results will be. You were a judge for every single art competition, and we've gone through hundreds of pieces of art together. It was difficult, wasn't it? Yes, it was very tough, Passing on some entries that were amazing was painful to do and was the worst thing about judging. There were just too many entries that far exceeded my expectations. I wanted to do a top 100 after seeing them all. Do you have a favorite piece of art from the competitions that we judged together? The most memorable for me was The Hand of the Rising Sun by Ricardo Emig, which received first place in the SEKIRO contest we first judged. All of his art turned out to be amazing. The same goes for Eugenia Lysa. I also want to give a shout out to Holdsworth Hands and Janine Maganito for their very unique and charming entries. If you could have competed in these competitions personally, is there anything you would have drawn? I think any great ideas I ever had were quickly forgotten once I had seen the standard of entries. Haha, I'd have placed nowhere. Where can readers go to find more of your work? You can find me on Twitter @JohnDevlinArt.